This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
Good morning, it's 3 minutes after 10 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. You could be forgiven for, if you're listening on Global Player, you could be forgiven for exercising the rewind function at this point and double-checking the date, because we're about to talk about Conservative Party difficulties caused by their dedication to and obsession with deporting refugees and asylum seekers to Rwanda. How many times has that been at the top of the news agenda? And it makes next to no sense. In fact, I think it might have reached peak madness yesterday. Not so much with the resignation of honest Bob Jenrick, which was inconvenient for the Prime Minister, but the prioritisation of personal ambition over anything that remotely resembles principle or party loyalty has been baked into this generation of Tories since they allowed Boris Johnson to become leader. Could you imagine if a Conservative popped up on the telly and gave you the impression that he cared more about your life than he did about improving his own position or advancing his own ambitions? You'd probably think you were tripping or hallucinating or some such. But so that is where we are. And indeed, the idea that a minister best known for helping a former pornographer with a property deal that had previously been stymied by local authorities, and of course ordering that a processing centre for unaccompanied child refugees be made even less welcoming than it was already. That's honest Bob's legacy right there. The idea that losing a minister like that from your government could be perceived as perilous or bad for a prime minister is a mark of just how completely bonkers everything has become. But here's the bit that I really don't get. Here's the bit that I really don't, or rather I get it, but I can't quite believe it, I think is what I would say. I can't quite believe it. The bit that boils everything down to these brass tacks. The deal, right, it's already cost us 140 million quid or more. Plus, as Peter Gagan has discovered on his rather excellent Substack account, we've spent about another 2 or 3 million on fighting the courts, fighting the legal battles in this ridiculous situation. And I think what happened yesterday, and you know, you can tell from my voice, can't you, that I'm not 100% sure about saying this out loud, because I'm 90% confident I've understood exactly what's going on, largely as a consequence of Rishi Sunak's letter, response to honest Bob Jenrick. I think that Rwanda now holds us to account on the rule of law, on the international rule of law. I mean, Rishi Sunak told Conservative MPs that the Rwanda deal would collapse if he acted outside international law. I think this is really important. I am, as ever, minded to ask, what the hell do you do if you still think you're a Tory, if you still think this lot are worth voting for? How do you hold it together now? I presume you just turn it off and watch Nigel in the Jungle or something, do you? I can't. I mean, what do you just have a quick look in Idiot's Corner? Okay, here's Ed. O'Brien won't be satisfied until there is a UK socialist state in perpetuity. He should move to North Korea. These people, they don't just have a vote. They're allowed to operate scissors unsupervised. I guess that's what you are now. If you see yourself, I'm conservative till I die, and you have to somehow muster up loyalty to and support for these absolute clown cars, you just end up in a position of utter gibberish, utter and undiluted gibberish. I mention that because I'm always interested in working out who the hell is still, according to the opinion polls, minded to vote for these people. But what happened yesterday was absolutely extraordinary. And I think I overuse the boiled frog analogy, but I think that we're so conditioned to the madness now. We're so sort of gaslit by the absurdity of the political situation or the catastrophic, the chaotic nature of a political system or successive governments built entirely on lies, embellishments and cults of personality, that we sometimes don't really notice the latest explosion of absurdity. Rishi Sunak had to tell his own MPs yesterday that if he does what they want, with regard to Rwanda, then Rwanda, an administration that still tortures and kidnaps political opponents and which ordered the shooting to death of refugees protesting about food rations just 3 or 4 years ago. That Rwanda there, Paul Kagame's Rwanda, right? If Rishi Sunak does what backbenchers like Mark Francois and now honest Bob Jenrick and Suella Braverman, if Rishi Sunak does what they want, Rwanda will call time on this deal. Rwanda will uphold international law in the face of calls by conservative backbenchers to abandon it. Do you know what? I'm on until 1. It's mystery hour at 12. I don't like to interfere with mystery hour. I'm tempted not to say anything else. It's 10 past 10. This disgusting policy, which even if you have sufficient moral depravity to approve of, you have to acknowledge is logistically dumb, is now under threat from the Rwandan government's insistence that the UK drops any plans it might have had to abandon international law in order to send people to a country that under our own laws, under our own judiciary, under our own judicial system, under British judges for British people, is adjudged to be unsafe. Absolutely incredible. And yet I think it's fair to say that we are so used now to this madness that the latest evidence of madness goes almost unremarked, or it does not go fully recognised and fully understood. So I am going to say it again, because I wonder how many people listening to this programme are fully cognizant of what I am describing. You have a policy designed to address a tiny, tiny fraction of a perceived problem with immigration numbers, right? And because the Conservative Party have closed down all safe routes for asylum seekers and refugees making their way to this country, they have been, if you like, forced into the hands of people traffickers and human smugglers, forced into these so-called small boats crossing the English Channel, right? So they created this problem single-handedly. This problem did not exist before this government came into power. It did not exist before Brexit. The small boats problem is a creation of callous policy designed to stop people coming here safely. So they then set themselves the challenge of stopping people coming here unsafely, while obviously expressing not a single scintilla of sympathy for the people actually imperiling their lives in the boats. They care so little for those humans that honest Bob Jenrick ordered the removal of murals rendering a welcome centre for unaccompanied child refugees even less welcoming than it was already. These are the people of whom we speak. So it's a problem entirely of their own making. The Rwanda issue will address a tiny, tiny proportion of this perceived problem. It is simultaneously being argued that it's absolutely fine to send people to Rwanda and they'll have a lovely time, but also that it's so awful that the prospect of being sent to Rwanda will deter people from trying to get to the UK in the first place via perilous means that they only have recourse to because the Tories have closed down all the safe routes, the safe, end quotes, legal, end quotes, routes. So the Rwanda idea has been inflated to unfeasible proportions. Suella Braverman, probably the most obviously disgusting politician of our lifetimes, and please God, that's not an invitation to somebody else to challenge her for the title. Suella Braverman boasts about dreaming of front pages describing the deportation of genuine refugees to a country where refugees get shot. And somehow Rishi Sunak's government has got itself into a place where the Rwandan government is now saying to Rishi Sunak that if you dance to Suella Braverman's tune, if you do the bidding of honest Bob Jenrick, if you accommodate the sick fantasies of Marc Francois, then we, the Rwandan government, the one that kidnaps and tortures political opponents, we will pull the plug on this deal because we don't want to be party to your breaches of international law. And you will turn your telly on or your radio on later today and you'll hear someone talking to a member of the government who I honestly don't think even understands the seriousness of what that situation describes. So caught up are they in their client journalism or their desperate attempts to reflect both sides and be balanced and impartial. They don't actually realise what we have become. A country being told by the Rwandan government that if our Conservative Prime Minister does the bidding of Conservative backbenchers like Marc Francois and Jacob Rees-Mogg, Robert Jenrick and Suella Braverman, then they, the Rwandan government, with £140 million of our money in their pocket in return for precisely zero, they will call time on the whole sick scheme because they don't want to be party to our breaches of international law. There's a slim possibility my analysis is wrong. 03456060973 is the number you need if you want to tell me how it is or where it is or why it is. But what I really want to hear from you is your explanation, stroke opinion, but explanation is a more useful word, I think, in this context. I want to hear your explanation of how this happened. How did we end up? How did the British government, how did the UK government end up in a place where the Prime Minister has to tell his own MPs that if he does what they want, then Rwanda will pull out of a deal to take asylum seekers from this country? It is absolutely extraordinary. And then factor in the numbers. Factor in the fact that even if it worked, you're looking at about 200 a year from an overall total, not just of people who make their way here by boats, but of people which would, I think, put you at about 45,755 in 2022. It's lower this year, but you're looking at can you do these sums? Do you remember how to do these sums? You put 200 over 27,284. That's the number this year as of the 13th of November. So you can cross off, 200 over, so a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the number of people making their way via this route. You want to count the number of people that have made their way here in total, then it's an even tinier fraction. It doesn't even touch the sides of the purported problem. And they've bet the whole flipping house on it. The entire house now. Rishi Sunak giving a press conference at 11 o'clock, which is sure to be about this. It's sure to be about this. How the hell has this happened? How have they ended up in a place where the Rwandan government now has managed to assume the moral high ground with the UK government? People are only just discovering that the traffic is going to be two ways anyway. Refugees will be making their way to the UK from Rwanda. If somebody commits a crime in Rwanda, even if this stupid scheme works, which it won't, they will get sent back to the UK. If we were to pull out of the European Convention on Human Rights, the Good Friday Agreement would blow up in our faces, something that I heard Natasha Clark explaining earlier today, one of the few political journalists in the country who's bothered to lay out those simple and unavoidable facts. I tell you now, you follow Irish media, they can't believe they're, even after all these years of rubbing their eyes at the madness being inflicted on the population on this side of the Irish Sea, they still can't believe that the absolutely inextricable role that the ECHR plays in the Belfast, in the Good Friday Agreement, has completely passed by everyone at the Telegraph or the Times or the Daily Mail. It's just breathtaking. But ultimately, the thing doesn't even seem to be popular. Remember, the Question Time audience was asked if they were in favour of it, and no one put their hand up, even Question Time, where the audience is deliberately selected to be supportive of the Conservative government because they fill the seats according to how votes were cast in 2019 when Boris Johnson came out with an 80-seat majority. So take a moment now. We're going to go to a break, a junction, whatever you prefer, a hiatus. And then come back and tell me how the Conservative Party in general and Rishi Sunak in particular got themselves into this mess. How did Rishi Sunak get himself into this mess? This mess here, this Rwanda-shaped mess. How did it happen? And thank you to everybody who's suggesting that in order to answer that question, you should read How They Broke Britain by me. But it's not all in there, because this is new. There's an inevitability to the collapse and the chaos that is a consequence of the ecosystem that I describe in the book. But this particular mess, this Rwandan mess, this utter debacle, this international humiliation, this ridiculous situation needs to be explained. So, 0345 6060 973, how the hell did this happen?
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
22 minutes after 10 is the time. So it could not be a bigger mess. People like Suella Braverman, until recently Home Secretary, and Robert Jenrick, until recently Immigration Minister, insist that Rishi Sunak does something which the Rwandan government have made clear doing would render the whole deal redundant. It would kill the whole deal. I cannot conceive of a self-created political scenario more awful and ridiculous than this one. So how did it happen? Jonathan's in Blackburn. Jonathan, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. First of all, I think you just wrote a book about how we ended up here.
No, not here. I maybe
no,
wrote.
I understand.
Thank you, but actually, I'm being unduly modest. I did. You're right, but even I can't put into words today how this happened. This specific example of absolute madness has been permitted to unfold.
I mean, I think the slow attrition of common sense from the Tory party. The worries about Brexit 2015 and people are moved out. You see sensible politicians go off to a different party because they can't live in the Tory party. And then Boris Johnson purges the Tory party of anything vaguely centrist. And then more and more worries post-Brexit leads to this inevitable drift to the very worst parts of right-wing politics.
But there's I suppose with Brexit and even with Johnson in 2019, they were on a tidal wave of popular support. That doesn't even exist here. It's at the very least it's nuanced, and at the very worst, if everybody understood what was going on, then you'd have to be mad to support it.
But people don't understand what's going on because of the way in which it's portrayed.
But there's no tidal wave of popular support, though, whether they understand it or not. It's not as if it's not even populism, really, because it's not particularly popular.
Well, I was stopped in a coffee shop last week by an elderly gentleman I was talking politics with a friend, and he intervened to say, don't worry about any of those things, because the big thing you need to worry about is mass migration.
Right.
Just stopped almost in the street.
But that's fine. And let's say he's right. I don't think he is personally, but let's say he is. This Rwanda policy doesn't make a blind bit of difference to any of it.
No, but I think it's a broader. There's a clause in this legislation, this draft legislation,
yes,
which essentially says the grass isn't green, the sky isn't blue,
yes,
and the clouds aren't white.
Yes. Because
every court has to find that Rwanda is a safe country, regardless of the facts on any given day before any given judge.
Yes.
And that's just, it enshrines just how far they're prepared to, and elements of the Conservative Party, without whom they think they can't win anything.
Yes.
So if they can't describe the world in a way that fits their particular outlook, if they can't find it fit like that, they'll rewrite the world to look differently.
Okay, and that's just true. That's not an opinion. That's just counting. But And they would not have seen this coming, which is why perhaps it's a slightly harder question to answer than we originally allow, because it didn't cross any of their minds that Rwanda would turn around and say, no, hang on a minute, if you disapply the European Convention on Human Rights or the International Convention on Refugees, if you disapply the UK's obligations under international law, which is what Braverman has specifically called for and what Jenrick explicitly wants, it didn't occur to them that Rwanda would turn around and say, hang on a minute, if you do that, the whole deal's off.
No, I don't think it occurred to anybody that they do that, because I suspect the people in the room in Rwanda with James Cleverly on, was it Monday or Tuesday this week, probably didn't go as far as saying, by the way, in order to shoo this through our own backbenchers, we're prepared potentially to ignore everything.
Or they just it's almost got a post-colonial feel to it, this, where they just thought, well, we've given you £140 million, you'll do whatever we jolly well want.
Absolutely.
I think that's a crucial part of it, actually. I think that first began to occur to me on Tuesday, the idea that this looks a little bit imperial, this behaviour. It's as if we're denying Rwanda agency. We're giving them money and a pat on the head and then telling them to dance to our tune. And Kagame is a very arrogant man, a very vain man. He wants Rwanda to be much more respected on the international stage. The idea of him being party to breaches of international law in return for money, well, that does not paint the picture that he's keen to portray to the world, I don't think.
Or even if he wasn't somebody who had those particular personality traits, no leader wants their country to look like they're the basest and most reprehensible country in the world. Well,
second
maybe
most.
One or two.
Yeah, but then that puts them, this thing here, the thing that Sunak had to explain to Conservative MPs yesterday, puts Paul Kagame's regime, which was kidnapping and torturing political opponents, like we spoke to the daughter of one of them just a month ago on this programme, it puts his regime on higher moral ground than the ground that Suella Braverman and Robert Jenrick inhabit. And that's extraordinary.
Everyone's on higher moral ground than the two people who were ministers, Home Secretary and a minister until 10 minutes ago, have been essentially held to moral and legal account by a regime that imprisons political opponents. How has that happened? Answer, we're getting there. But actually, I hadn't fully appreciated in my introduction how box fresh this is. This is completely live. So part of the answer to the question involves an extra condition, which is Braverman and Jenrick, it didn't cross their mind that Rwanda would turn around and say, sorry, we don't want any of that. It may well be this is the message Cleverly has brought back from Kigali to Rishi Sunak. He's brought back the message that actually they're not, it doesn't matter how much money we give them, they're not going to take the refugees if we're only rendering Rwanda a safe country by dropping our obligations, our international obligations to the European Human Rights Law and the International Convention on Refugees. So the question possibly explains why Jenrick was able to resign so promptly.
Yes.
After something that he already knew was going to be announced in Parliament had gone.
Which means that his position is defined by personal ambition. He presumably understands that Sunak can't go any further, but he understands that the next iteration of the Tory party may be led by people who insist that he should have done anyway. And we're back to unicorns and fantasies and Brexit. So it is worth trying to thrash this stuff out. Paul Rusesabagina is the most obvious example of a political opponent that Paul Kagame has kidnapped and tortured. I had the pleasure of meeting Paul last month, and I can tell you now, among the diaspora, the Rwandan diaspora, all too familiar with the regime that is in place in Kigali, the idea of the UK government cozying up to these people is repellent enough already. And yet they've managed to make it even worse by giving Kagame now the moral high ground to turn around and say, well, hang on a minute, £140 million is all well and good, but if you actually break international law, if you actually override a Supreme Court ruling by disapplying the UK's obligations under the European human rights laws and the International Convention on Refugees, then we're going to call time on the whole deal. That's the mess that I don't think people fully understand the scale of this mess. I don't think that Well, I don't know whether Braverman and Jenrick do, but an awful lot of their client journalists clearly don't. 10:31 is the time. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:35 is the time. It may be a glitch in the Matrix, but the podium behind which Rishi Sunak is due to give his conference in half an hour or so, can you guess what the slogan is on the front of it? Go on, have a guess. Stop the boats. That's the slogan. This is a government presiding over... I mean, you know what's happening in the NHS. I don't know if you've tried to catch a train to anywhere in this country at the moment. You know that the infrastructure is crumbling, roads, everything, it feels, is fraying at the edges. Number of right-wing newspapers that have written articles about Britain being broken is frankly extraordinary, because they never mention that they've had everything they wanted for the last 13 years. 5 prime ministers, 1 referendum, 4 general elections, or 5 general... I can't keep up. It's absolutely extraordinary. In fact, think about just the last 7 years. Every single thing they've wanted for the last 7 years, and everything's gone wrong. So whose fault could that possibly be? Could it possibly be the fault of the people who've been in charge and the people who put them there? No. It's all the fault of Carol Vorderman and Gary Lineker. Do keep up. It's ridiculous. And that's it now. I don't get it, actually. How can a UK Prime Minister, with the country and the state that it's in now, be obsessing about dinghies crossing the English Channel containing just shy of 30,000 people so far this year? 30,000 people so far this year. And stop the boats is the slogan stuck on the front of the lectern. Suella Braverman gave an interview today, and it was handled very well, actually, by Nick Robinson on Radio 4, but better late than never, I suppose. But she gave an interview today when she said, "No more slogans," which is, of course, a slogan. It's probably one of the best slogans ever. No more slogans, as Lewis Goodall pointed out on Twitter earlier. It's the madness that we're in. And this is one of those mornings where we take a step back, mop our brow, look at each other, sort of, you do that thing where you go, blimey, cool, blimey, and then start trying to unravel it all. So they've bet the house on a policy that is performatively cruel, but that's easy to understand, that's easy to explain. Why are they doing this? Because promising to be vile to foreigners, even if they're genuine refugees, plays very well with the sort of Faragist fringe of the Tory party and the Tory vote, but not if it doesn't work. And it can't work. And it's reached the point now where the Rwandan government is saying, if you do what Suella Braverman wants to Rishi Sunak, we're out. It's over. And Suella Braverman is saying, you must do what I want. Just riddle me that. Victoria's in Stansted. Victoria, what would you like to say?
But it's so pathetic and so depressing, isn't it?
I presume you're talking about the political situation that we're currently facing, rather than this show in general, or anything sort of more generalised.
I'm talking about the political climate. My synopsis starts in April 2016. Yes. Cameron calls an oversimplified, deeply flawed referendum that divides everybody, to use your phrase, footballification. Corbyn doesn't present any viable or electable alternative. Farage walks in and gives breath to stupid people, and Trump supports him in showing that you can say stupid, deeply offensive things and still get away with it. Then we get Have I Got News For You, clown.
You're going quite far back. I'm going to have to hurry you up because we're still in about 2002. How have they ended up? Hang on. How have they ended up betting the house on a policy that won't work? But even if it did work, it wouldn't make a blindest bit of difference to the problem that they say it's going to solve.
Because they've got nothing left. They've nailed themselves to this mast. Pride, they can't be seen to binning it off. They've already binned off HS2.
What would happen if they binned it off, though? Why can't they bin it off? I love that phrase, by the way. They cleverly could come in and say, look, with Suella Braverman's gone and she's taken all the munchkins with her. It's game over. We're not doing this daft thing anymore.
They want to retain power as long as they can. They're trying to defer a general election by any means because they're totally self-absorbed.
But this isn't working. It's making everyone angry with them. Even the racists are angry with them now.
They can't see the wood for the trees. Nothing works, and they still tag on. It's like a wasp on its last day of life, just trying to eke another 30 minutes out. And then they're just banking on this single issue, and nobody's got any better ideas. And the reason they don't is because all the quality is in the private sector where they're earning properly, and we're in total disarray.
You are covering a lot of ground, aren't you? I've got a better idea. You just go back to where we were in 2015 and have safe and legal routes for people to apply for asylum in this country.
That's exactly what should be happening. Instead of spending all our money on investigating Boris Johnson and parties in Westminster, we should be spending our money on putting proper systems in place which are designed by experts.
Well, no, I don't buy that as an either-or. I'm perfectly comfortable with the idea of a Prime Minister who lied through his teeth and led the country through a period of unprecedented peril with both of his eyes shut and his scratching his arse most of the time. I've got no problem at all with spending money on stuff like that. It's not a choice between having good systems and having accountability, but I mean, I tally with a lot of what you say. Maybe I'm being a bit ambitious. I'm insisting that people zone in on the specific moment that we're in. And it's a little bit rich of me to do that, given that I have, as earlier callers have pointed out, written a whole book about how the ecosystem in which this could happen has been created. It's an ecosystem where the truth doesn't matter, where nativism and xenophobia or jingoism has been afforded rarefied status, where politicians have managed to achieve prominence simply by being vile about immigration in general or refugees in particular. It is an ecosystem in which you do not have to be punished when you're found to have done wrong, like Priti Patel being a bully, Boris Johnson promising to protect her, Owen Paterson breaking the rules, Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson promising to protect him, trying to set fire to the rule book. The list is endless. But Rishi Sunak, oddly, is a beneficiary of this madness, but not necessarily an architect of it. So how did he end up in a situation where he's bet the house on a policy that almost certainly won't work, and even if it did, it wouldn't make a blindest bit of difference to the problem that he is seeking to solve? That's the bit I don't get. 0345 6060 Abigail's in Preston. Abigail, what would you like to say?
Hiya. So I watched the Suella Braverman last night, and I heard, as whoever else listened to her using the words rapists, murderers, immigrants. It was an attempt of vilifying immigrants as a way of getting votes through fear. I felt it was the sort of lowest common denominator of trying to sort of terrify the British public, because fear is an incredibly powerful way of getting people on your side. And it only takes a little bit of someone to have a little bit of doubt, and fear creeps in, and then you've got
this
them.
Explains. I'm being a right old head teacher today, Abigail, so I apologise in advance. But that explains why they've pursued it to this point. Or that explains. I mean, she's doing a Farage. She's basically just saying all people coming here from other countries are dodgy. And that's how you end up with people voting to get rid of them and then turning around the morning after the referendum and saying to their friends and their colleagues and their daughter-in-law, oh, we didn't mean you. So the Daily Mail has been doing that for years. The attempt to portray anybody the Daily Mail was doing it with German Jews and Polish Jews in the 1930s. It's a business model for these people, and Braverman's bought into that. But it should lead, in a logical universe, to a policy that at least works. They could, for example, on legal migration, they could have just refused to issue visas on anything like the scale that they've issued them. But they know privately that would render the NHS and the care sector absolutely inoperable. They'd be completely broken. And then when you come to the so-called small boats, the just shy of 30,000 people that have made their way to this country via that channel, via that means this year, less than half, by the way, of the total number of asylum applications, the policy should be designed to take big chunks out of that number, and it won't, and it can't, and it doesn't. That's the bit I don't get. How can they still be blowing their kazoos for a policy that 99% certain won't work, and even if it does, won't make any difference to anything?
Possibly the amount of U-turns that they have had, that they are, like other callers have said, clinging on to something that they've started.
Yeah, so they've sort of tied themselves in a knot in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And, as usual, there's the infighting in the Tory party. We're getting fractions again, that are really, really visible fractions. We know that there's going to be a general election within the next 12 months. So what can Rishi do? He's not on the left, the extreme left of the party. So he's got to sit
Who is on the extreme left of the Tory party?
Sorry, right.
Oh,
right.
sorry.
No,
I was going to say, that's a small Christmas party, isn't it, that one? No, well, I think he is actually. I think he is much further to the right than we thought when he became prime minister. But not in a vicious way. If it's such a thing can be possible, he'll just quietly go along with it rather than making speeches about how designed to create the impression that everybody who has come here from another country must be a rapist, which is such a weird thing for people whose parents came here from another country to do, because it's the rhetoric of the National Front. It's the rhetoric of Enoch Powell. But I listened to it, and then we spoke about it with my boyfriend, and we were like, I just can't believe that we're hearing things like this in British society, and how is this allowed? How is this not called out? Yeah, maybe you've nailed it, Actually, maybe I'm being daft this morning, trying to bring logic to the conversation. Suella Braverman's calculation is, if she can make enough people hate refugees, hate asylum seekers, hate immigrants enough, and promise to fix it, even having been Home Secretary for the best part of the last 2 years, charged with fixing it, that is just personal ambition and logic and evidence be damned. That is what will get me into Downing Street.
Yeah, and Rishi can't do anything now at this point. He can't do a U-turn because the Tories are known at the moment for their U-turns. So all he's got to do is carry on smiling, carry on, get through this next year, and push, flogging a dead horse.
And then he'll be back in Silicon Valley by next Christmas with his feet up and his spending more time with his fortune. No, I get that impression. He looked yesterday like a man who's had enough. Abigail, great work. I think actually the answer to the question I asked is actually a lot simpler than the question sounded. I think I know the answer to the question of how this has happened, and I think we've actually stumbled across it in the course of this morning. I think Abigail's nailed what Braverman's up to. Braverman is just Farage 2.0. It doesn't matter about evidence, doesn't matter about facts. Look how effective it is to scare people. Rupert Murdoch's been doing it for years. Daily Mail has been doing it for years. Just scare people. Brilliant business model. Fox News, more scared they are, gets Donald Trump all the way into the White House, even though the man lies as easily as the rest of us breathe. Racist lies or race-baiting lies. That's Suella Braverman. That's her sorted. How Sunak's ended up in this mess, I think we've actually answered that question definitively. I can say that because it's Thursday. I think we've answered that question definitively by accident in the last 45 minutes. Did you notice what the answer was? I'll tell you after this.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
10:51 is the time. I mean, the idea that we've overthought it is always in the back of my mind, but I don't think a question like how the hell has this happened can be overthought. That the scale of the mess that this Rwanda scheme has created for Rishi Sunak was clearly not foreseen. The question of whether or not it was foreseeable is pertinent. Looking at the latest iteration, they obviously factored in the possibility that the Supreme Court, the UK Supreme Court, would reject it on the grounds that Rwanda is not a safe country, an objective judgment that Rwanda is not a safe country, and therefore you can't send anybody there. A safe third country policy would be acceptable, but they can't find one. They can't find a third country to deport people to. So they had to find an unsafe third country to deport people to. And then they must have calculated that we can overcome the legal situation by threatening to or actually pulling out of the European Convention on Human Rights. But then the Supreme Court kicked in and pointed out, well, it's not just the ECHR that you would be disapplying to get this through. It's also the International Convention on Refugees. I think there may have been one or two other acts as well, international, supranational law that everybody abides by except sort of Russia and North Korea, possibly Belarus, I think, as well. But these are, pretty much the only safeguards that international the international community has against dictatorship and the rest of it. So we're going to pull out of them as well. And I think the answer is a lot simpler than I expected it to be at 10 o'clock this morning. I think the miscalculation here is taking Rwanda for granted. I think back to that picture of Braverman cackling in the company of a couple of Rwandan officials. I mean, truly cackling, throwing her head back and opening her mouth so wide and cackling like a sort of Wizard of Oz witch. I mean, hideous scenes given what she was cackling about, the deportation of genuine refugees to a country where refugees get shot. But that sort of created the idea perhaps in our minds that the Rwandans would go along with anything. They'd go along with whatever we said. That's why we chose them. We'll give them 140 million quid and they'll dance to our tune. So the bit they didn't see coming only happened in the last few days. The bit where the Rwandan government turns around and says, if you disapply international conventions on refugees or international human rights laws, we won't take these people. Because we're making them party to perceived crimes, things that look like crimes to the rest of the world. Technically, we've changed the laws in the UK so they wouldn't be crimes. That's it, isn't it? I think that's it. And I think that comes from a place of post-imperial arrogance. I think that comes from a place of thinking, well, Johnny Foreigner will jolly well do whatever we have to do. It's a shame we have to pay them money these days rather than just boff them over their head and give them their orders. The good old days. These days, we've got to give Johnny Foreigner 140 million quid to get him to do whatever we want, take out our dirty washing, do our laundry. In Rwanda, I think that's what's happened. I'm quite, I don't want to say pleased with this because it's such a horrible thing to be contemplating, but I think that's what's happened. And I think we're a bit ahead of the curve on explaining this, largely because most of my profession is still struggling to understand what's actually going on. Nicholas is in Glasgow. I hope you're not going to rain on my parade, Nicholas. What would you like to say?
No, I'm not raining your parade, but what I have to say effectively is you look at Rwanda's standing in the world,
yes,
and a country such as that effectively has the morality to say that we will not be party to Britain in breaking further laws.
Yeah.
And effectively, does that not show you how we're perceived by the rest of the world?
I mean, it makes you wonder, doesn't it?
It certainly does. And effectively, you're saying, how do we end up here? And my contention, how we ended up here, with two unelected leaders of this country falling upon Boris the liar, a man who never held down an ordinary job, and effectively the tone and the moral levels that they would descend to in order to keep themselves in power. And what we have just now is diversionary politics. Let's all go on to the immigrants. Let's get into these boats. Never mind the fact the National Health Service is crumbling. The price of living in this country for the normal working people is getting prohibitive. And effectively, we're in a complete morass. And effectively, and to use an old Scottish term, you would send neither of them for a bag of rolls. And you've got Suella Braverman sitting there, someone who has been beneficiary to the fact that we do take in immigrants. And I hard to believe that she's now putting up the ladder to make sure nobody else has the opportunities that she's had. And you remember, of course, she's that very famous author who helped that legal book whereby she did at least the photocopying. Yeah, well, does that tell you precisely what you're dealing with?
Well, yes, it does. But even if you make a long list of the failings of the cast, I still can't quite believe the latest production is so awful. And I think it hinges upon their failure to recognise that Rwanda might actually behave autonomously, independently and legally. It just didn't cross their mind.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll say nothing without being a sycophant or patronising. I saw your interview with Mattis, and remarkable. And it's so important.
Thank you.
So important that we keep a sense of perspective and that people do voice attitudes and views that you do have, because effectively I consider the situation here for this democracy is in peril.
I do too. Well, as you know, I do too. I think these are examples of threats. And you look at what's happening in America now, and we've been a alongside America in a lot of our national decline. Donald Trump essentially now saying out loud or floating out loud the possibility that an election victory for him next year would be a public support for a form of dictatorship. So democracy is under threat. An SNP MP yesterday, Nicholas, I'm sure you heard, used the F word in the House of Commons, used the word fascism. Extraordinary scenes, truly extraordinary scenes, and yet most people don't understand it. I don't know how many people the Chelsea mod represents. He writes 30,000 coming over on boats and then lots of emojis. Need to check your sources, mate. Well, I have, mate. And it's 27,284 people who crossed the English Channel in 2023 as of the 13th of November, and those are the only available figures. That is literally the only people counting. That is the number. That is the government. That is the problem they're trying to fix. But you, in your sort of boiled head, have come up with the idea that the number is much, much bigger because you want it to be. Because you want to be terrorised. You want to be frightened. You want to be distracted from how rubbish your own life is by obsessing about people whose life is measurably worse. But, on your crack. It is coming up to 11 o'clock. Here's the plan. Prime Minister giving a news conference shortly. We will pull out of the news if it begins and cross immediately to Downing Street. It's happening inside, not outside, which means it won't be general election or resignation or anything like that. And I can tell you that the 3 words plastered across the front of the podium behind which Rishi Sunak will shortly be standing are "Stop the boats." And there's 2 flags, only 2. Haul him over the coals for that. Why aren't there 24 flags there? God, what sort of a patriot is he? So we'll take that live shortly.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 11 o'clock, the Prime Minister is set to defend his efforts to revive the Rwanda policy at a Downing Street news conference.
And here is Rishi Sunak.
Today, the government has introduced the toughest anti-illegal immigration law ever. I know that it will upset some people, and you will hear a lot of criticism about it. So it's right to explain why I've decided to do this. I'm the child of immigrants. I understand why some people take the risk of getting into unsafe dinghies to cross open waters. It's because the United Kingdom is an incredible country. It offers opportunity, hope and safety. But the difference is, my family came here legally. Like most immigrants, they integrated into local communities, worked hard to provide for their family, built lives and businesses, found friends and neighbours, and most of all, they were really proud to become British. That feeling of pride, it cascades down the generations and grows, and that's why you see so many children of immigrants sitting around the cabinet table. But it's not a given. Illegal immigration undermines not just our border controls, it undermines the very sense of fairness that is so central to our national character. We play by the rules. We put in our fair share. We wait our turn. Now, if some people can just cut all of that out, you've not just lost control of your borders, you've fatally undermined the very fairness upon which trust in our system is based. That's why this legislation is so necessary, to deliver an effective deterrent to those who wish to come here illegally, to restore people's trust that the system is fair, and ultimately to stop the boats. And so our bill today fundamentally addresses the Supreme Court's concerns over the safety of Rwanda. I did not agree with that judgment, but I respect it. That is why we have spent the last 3 weeks working tirelessly to respond to their concerns and to guarantee Rwanda's safety in a new, legally binding international treaty. The Supreme Court were clear that they were making a judgment about Rwanda at a specific moment 18 months ago, and that the problems could be remedied. Today, we are confirming that they have been, and that unequivocally, Rwanda is a safe country. And today's bill also ends the merry-go-round of legal challenges that have blocked our policy for far too long. We simply cannot have a situation where our ability to control our borders and stop people taking perilous journeys across the Channel is held up in endless litigation in our courts. So this bill gives Parliament the chance to put Rwanda's safety beyond question in the eyes of this country's law. Parliament is sovereign. It should be able to make decisions that cannot be undone in the courts. And it was never the intention of international human rights laws to stop a sovereign parliament removing illegal migrants to a country that is considered safe in both parliamentary statute and international law. So the bill does include what are known as notwithstanding clauses. These mean that our domestic courts will no longer be able to use any domestic or international law, including the Human Rights Act, to stop us removing illegal migrants. Let me just go through the ways that individual illegal migrants try and stay. Claiming asylum, that's now blocked. Abuse of our modern slavery rules, blocked. The idea that Rwanda isn't safe, blocked. The risk of being sent to some other country, blocked. And spurious human rights claims, you'd better believe that we've blocked those too because we're completely disapplying all the relevant sections of the Human Rights Act. And not only have we blocked all of these ways that illegal migrants will try and stay, we've also blocked their ability to try and stay by bringing a judicial review on any of those grounds. That means that this bill blocks every single reason that has ever been used to prevent flights to Rwanda from taking off. The only extremely narrow exception will be that if you can prove with credible and compelling evidence that you specifically have a real and imminent risk of serious and irreversible harm. We have to recognise that as a matter of law. And if we didn't, we'd undermine the treaty we've just signed with Rwanda. As the Rwandans themselves have made clear, if we go any further, the entire scheme will collapse. And there is no point having a bill with nowhere to send people to. But I'm telling you now, we have set the bar so high that it will be vanishingly rare for anyone to meet it. And once you have been removed, you will be banned for life from travelling to the UK, settling here, or becoming a citizen. But of course, even with this new law here at home, we could still face challenges from the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. So let me repeat what I said 2 weeks ago. I will not allow a foreign court to block these flights. If the Strasbourg court chooses to intervene against the express wishes of our sovereign parliament, I will do what is necessary to get flights off. And today's new laws already make clear that the decision on whether to comply with interim measures issued by the European Court is a decision for British government ministers and British government ministers alone. Because it is your government, not criminal gangs or indeed foreign courts, who decides who comes here and who stays in our country. Now, of course, our Rwanda policy is just one part of our wider strategy to stop the boats. And that strategy is working. I've been Prime Minister for just over a year now, and for the first time, small boat arrivals here are down by a third, even as illegal crossings in the Mediterranean have soared by 80%. Let me just repeat that. Small boat arrivals here are down by a third. To help achieve that, we've signed returns and cooperation agreements with France, Bulgaria, Turkey, Italy and Georgia. Illegal working raids are up nearly 70%. 50 hotels are being returned to their local communities, and we are housing people in a new barge and in former military sites. The initial asylum backlog is down from 92,000 to less than 20,000. We've returned over 22,000 illegal migrants, and as our deal with Albania shows, deterrence works. Last year, a third of all those arriving in small boats were Albanian. This year, we've returned 5,000 people and cut those arrivals by 90%. And Albanian arrivals have far more recourse to the courts than anyone under this new legislation. That's why I'm so confident that this bill will work. Lord Sumption, the former Supreme Court judge, believes this bill will work. We will get flights off the ground, we will deter illegal migrants from coming here, and we will finally stop the boats. Thank you. We turn some questions from the media. Can we start with the BBC?
Thank you, Prime Minister. Chris Mason, BBC News. Are you saying to your MPs bluntly on all of this, back me or sack me?
Now, what I'm saying, not just to my MPs, but the entire country, is that I share their frustration. Right? My patience with this has worn thin. Right? One of my 5 priorities at the beginning of the year was to stop the boats, and I'm pleased that we've made progress. Down by a third. For the first ever time, by the way. That shows that our plan is working, but we've got more to do. And that's why this legislation is so important. We've got to end the legal merry-go-round that has blocked us from getting our Rwanda scheme up and running. That's what this legislation does. That's what the new treaty that the Home Secretary signed this week does. And it will mean unequivocally that Rwanda is safe, and there should be no more blocks to our ability to get people on planes and send them to Rwanda, because that is critical. We must have a deterrent that says if you come here illegally, you cannot stay and you will be removed. And when we can get that up and running, as we have with Albania, we will see the numbers come down. I'm absolutely committed to seeing this through because I share the British people's frustration. It's patently unfair what is happening at the moment, which is why it requires action like this that is novel, that is contentious, but that's what we're about. We're about getting stuff done on the things that matter. This matters, and we're going to make sure that we deliver. Next, can I turn to ITV?
Prime Minister, you've made clear that stopping the boats is one of your biggest promises to voters, and you're also telling us this legislation is the way to do it. So can I ask you, will next week's vote be treated as a vote of confidence in your government, and will you throw Conservative MPs out of the party if they defy you?
You don't know, but what this vote is about confidence in Parliament to demonstrate that it gets the British people's frustration. I get it. I'm acting on it. So actually the real question when it comes to all these votes is for the Labour Party, because I want to get this legislation on the statute books as quickly as possible. That's what we're all about. We've moved at record pace since the judgment to get the treaty, to get the bill introduced. So the question now is the Labour Party. Because we've got a plan, right? We've got a plan to pass this legislation, and I want to pass it quickly. Right, but I'm not hearing from anyone else that they've got a plan, right? So the real question, when it comes to Parliament, question for all of you to ask is, what are the Labour Party going to do about this vote? What are they going to do about this legislation? Because we've got a clear plan to stop the boats. Deterrence is a critical part of it. There is no way to stop people coming here unless you have a deterrent that means they will be sent somewhere else. It's as simple as that. This is our deterrent, and we are doing everything we can to get it on the statute books and get it up and running. So the question for votes in Parliament is, what is the Labour Party's plan, and are they going to back this legislation? Next, can we go to Sky?
Thank you. Prime Minister, do you see the reality of what is happening here? You've lost control of your party, and this has become a confidence issue, not in Parliament, but in you. Do you accept that, and will you call an election if you lose these votes?
What's happening here is we're delivering on what I said. Right? Let's just look at the record, let's just look at the facts. When I got this job, the number of small boat arrivals into this country had quadrupled in the past few years. Right? That's what happened. Since I've been here, and because of all the things that we've done, we've got the numbers down by a third. Right? That's my record on this situation, where we've got the number of illegal enforcement raids up by 70%. We've arrested literally hundreds and hundreds of people, right, in those raids, but also people who are coming illegally, who are facilitating this awful trade. We've closed down thousands of people's bank accounts who shouldn't have been here. We're returning over 20,000 people. That's my record on this issue. Those are the facts, and that's because I get it. That's because this is ridiculous what's going on. Right? And we're doing something about it. Now, I want to finish the job, right? And finishing the job means getting this legislation on the statute books and getting this scheme up and running. I am determined to see that through because I think this is a top priority for the country. It's a basic matter of fairness, right? And that's what we're about. We're about delivering. I'm not interested in talking. I'm interested in doing things. The actions we've taken already have already made a difference, but we've got to finish the job, and I'm going to see this thing through.
Is it election time?
I said, I'm confident I can get this thing done, right? And I said, same question as I said to Anushka on ITV, the question is for the Labour Party. right? We're going to get this thing into Parliament. We've introduced it in record time. I want to get it on the statute books in record time. So the question is, not for me, I've got a plan. It's very clear what we're about and what we're trying to do, and we're confident it's going to work. And my track record tells you that I can get things done. The question's for everyone else. And crucially, the Labour Party, what's their plan? Are they going to vote for this legislation? Because if they really want to stop the boats, if they really get the values of the British people, then they should be fully backing this plan, and they haven't done that yet. Next, can we go to Daily Mail?
Thanks, PM. Your immigration minister resigned last night, calling this legislation a triumph of hope over experience. I mean, he's right, isn't he? And he says you're going to end up being yet another politician who makes promises on immigration that you can't keep. I mean, he's right. This isn't going to work, is it?
No, he's simply not right, actually. And Robert Jenrick, in his letter himself, outlined the remarkable progress that we've made in the last years. If you want to talk about experience and delivering on what you say, just look at the record. Right? I'll repeat it again. I know we've heard it a few times, but it is bear repeating. Numbers of crossings down by a third. Doesn't happen by accident because they're up everywhere else in Europe. It's happened because we've done a load of things, because I've focused on this issue. We've struck deals with people, we've cooperated, we've intercepted criminal gangs upstream, we're returning people, we're getting the backlog down, we're closing hotels, we're arresting people, we're closing down bank accounts. We're doing more to tackle this issue than anyone's ever done. That's the experience of the last year. That's my record on delivering on what I say. And I am entirely confident that what we're doing is the right approach. I have spent weeks, if not months, in the last few periods getting this right, working through it with multiple lawyers, making sure that we have something that is legally watertight, that is robust. This is the toughest legislation that has ever been passed on this issue. Let me just going to go over it again, right? It deems Rwanda safe using a notwithstanding clause, right? We haven't done that before. That means that no one can second-guess Parliament's decision or any interpretation of international law. It makes clear that it's our Parliament that is sovereign. It disapplies relevant sections of the Human Rights Act so we can stop people making spurious claims. And we've stopped people bringing judicial review on any of these grounds. We've stopped them claiming asylum. We've stopped them claiming modern slavery, right? We have blocked each and every avenue that anyone has ever used in the past to frustrate their removal. All of those avenues have been shut down, right? So for the people who say you should do something different, the difference between them and me is an inch, given everything that we have closed. We're talking about an inch, but that inch, by the way, is the difference between the Rwandans participating in this scheme and not. And as I said in my remarks, there's no point having a piece of legislation which means you can't actually send anyone anywhere. It's not going to help anyone, right? So when we're talking about an inch of difference, and that inch making the difference between having an operational scheme where you can send someone or not, it's pretty clear that what we're doing is not only the right approach, it's the only approach. Right? I'm determined to actually fix this problem, and the people who want to do something else clearly don't, because I'm confident this will work. There's no point having a piece of legislation with no one to send anyone to at the end of it, right? So that's what we're getting on with. Next, The Sun.
Prime Minister, if you don't get a flight to Rwanda off the ground by the time you call the next election, are the voters entitled to lose trust in you and put their faith elsewhere?
You know, I think this is a Conservative government that is absolutely getting things done, doing what we say we are going to do. We've stabilised the economy and we've cut taxes for people. We've introduced the biggest ever tax cut for businesses to get them investing. We've got immigration falling with a tough set of measures that we've just announced to go further. We've got boat crossings down by a third. We've also said that we would halve inflation. We've delivered on it, easing the cost of living. We said we would get debt down and grow the economy. We're on track to do all those things too. So ultimately, look, it's the British people who get to decide whether what we've said and what we've done have worked. I'm very confident in the record that we've put together over the last year, and I'm confident that the British people will see that because it's making a real difference in their lives. I take one last one. Chris, yes.
Chris Hope, GB News. GB News has been in Calais, Prime Minister, where migrants have told us that they are laughing at the UK and its Rwandan policy. Are they right to laugh? Is your policy a joke? And your government a laughing stock on this matter? And can I quickly ask a second one? There's reports today in the House of Commons that UK politicians were hacked by Russia, FSB. Were you hacked by the FSB?
No, look, so on the second one, there are a range of protections that both parliamentarians and ministers have and advice that they follow, and they get support from the National Cyber Centre and all those things, and I'm pretty confident in the protections that I have. On your first question, look at the results. So you've been over in Calais, you've been over in France. Well, the number of people crossing from France to the UK this year is down by a third. Right? That's the simple truth. We've arrested hundreds of people who have helped facilitate those crossings this year. Many of them have already been charged, and they're going to end up going to jail. Right? People that have come illegally are having their bank accounts closed. 22,000 of them have been returned. And by the way, in the rest of Europe, none of that is happening because the numbers are up. They're up by 80% in the Mediterranean. So actually, what we're doing is making a difference. We're disrupting criminal gangs upstream before they get anywhere near Calais in the first place. We're working more closely with the French. For the first time, we have British officers embedded in their patrols. Why? Because I went and struck a good arrangement with the French. Not for reasons of sentimentality, because it's in the British national interest to have that cooperation on those beaches to stop people coming, and that cooperation is working. You would have seen pictures of some of the barriers that were being put in rivers on the way up to the beaches. Right? That's come as a result of that cooperation. It stops people getting there in the first place, and the proof is in the pudding, right? I'm not about talking, I'm about action. The numbers of people crossing from exactly where you were to the UK are down by a third. They quadrupled in the last few years, and they're up everywhere else. So that should tell you, tell me, and tell the country that what we're doing is working. It is making a difference, but we've got to finish the job. That's why this legislation is so important. That's why we've worked so hard on it. I'm absolutely confident that it's the right approach. It's the toughest ever approach. It will close down all the avenues that people have used in the past. And crucially, as I said, it is the only approach. Because going any further, that difference is an inch, but going any further would mean that Rwanda will collapse the scheme, and then we will have nowhere to send anyone to. And that is not a way to get this going. So what everyone should do is support this bill. Crucially, the Labour Party, the question for them is, are they going to support this legislation? Because we want to get it up and running as quickly as possible so we can finish the job, have a deterrent and stop the boats. That's what I'm committed to doing. That's what the team is committed to doing. And we're going to make sure that we see it through. Thank you very much.
The Labour Party, by the way, has made it crystal clear on several occasions that they will not be supporting this legislation. Rishi Sunak knows that. He's just banking on you being too ill-informed to know, but you're not, because I just told you. I've just some breaking news for you. Apparently Rishi Sunak is about to pass a law stating that that was actually a brilliant performance, which means that it suddenly will be a brilliant performance, because that's how the British government works now.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
23 minutes after 11. So there it is. A policy that will make precious little difference to the numbers, but in Rishi Sunak's wildest dreams will operate as a deterrent to people risking their lives to come to the UK. And I mean, it's hard sometimes to move from a standing start. And we knew that this was likely to happen. But he is essentially turning the eternal cry of the toddler, the eternal cry of the toddler's tantrum, into policy. He is essentially saying, it's true because I say so. Actually, that's the parent responding to the toddler, isn't it? It's true because I say so. Rwanda is safe because we say so. So there are all manner of measures in place to reach an objective judgment on questions such as the safety of a third country. And they have concluded that Rwanda is not safe. So rather than either find a third country that is safe or help Rwanda to address the issues that led the Supreme Court and others to conclude that it's not safe, or abandon this ludicrous policy entirely because it's largely meaningless, Rishi Sunak has just announced, he's just stood up in front of the British public and announced that he is going to pass laws to make things that are not true, true. And that's actually scary. That's actually quite scary. I don't know off the top of my head whether what he's just said really changes anything in terms of the likelihood of 200 people ever going to Rwanda. 200 a year, I think, maximum. 5 years we pay. I mean, it is, by every measure, it's mad politics. We'll talk to Natasha Clark shortly about who he was really talking to. Significant that he took a question from GB News, which has about 11 viewers, and didn't take a question from Channel 4 News or LBC, or even the Times didn't get a question, did they? Or the Telegraph. Quite extraordinary, really, that little start-up gets a question, but some of the best established political journalists in the country didn't. But that's just me being a bit niche. Let's talk to Natasha Clark, who is now outside Downing Street. For once, for a reason. Quite often when you cross live to people outside Downing Street, they could be anywhere. They could be at home in their back garden, just encouraging blackbirds to make some noise in the background to prove they're outdoors. But you have literally just stepped out of the building. Who was he talking to?
Morning, James. I think he was talking to his backbenchers just there, wasn't he? And I think the key bit of that press conference that I took away, apart from his slightly rattled, frustrated and frankly a little bit tired and grumpy demeanour.
No, sorry, Natasha. I apparently they're passing a law to say that it was a brilliant press conference, so you're going to have to review your opinion of that shortly.
I will retract that when the law passes.
Yes.
But the most interesting bit of that, I thought, was his message to his backbenchers that there is literally just an inch, he claims, between me and them.
For the people who say you should do something different, the difference between them and me is an inch, given everything that we have closed. We're talking about an inch, but that inch, by the way, is the difference between the Rwandans participating in this scheme and not. And as I said in my remarks, there's no point having a piece of legislation which means you can't actually send anyone anywhere. It's not going to help anyone, right? So when we're talking about an inch of difference, and that inch making the difference between having an operational scheme where you can send someone or not, it's pretty clear that what we're doing is not only the right approach, it's the only approach, right? I'm determined to actually fix this problem, and the people who want to do something else clearly don't, because I'm confident this will work. There's no point having a piece of legislation with no one to send anyone to at the end of it.
So the Prime Minister's arguing that if he goes any further, as Tory MPs on the right of his party want him to do, then Rwanda will pull out of the whole deal. It's a message to his backbenchers today, I think, that I am going as far as he feels that he can. He said it was the toughest bit of legislation ever, that he wants to finish the job, that he wants to get it done. He came out with all the tough talking, but the question is really whether Tory MPs believe it or not, whether they feel that he is going to go as far as anyone has ever gone before, whether if an interim order comes from those European courts, will he pull that trigger and will he block it? Will he ignore it and allow those flights to take off as ministers have not previously done in the past? They've got new powers to do so. Will he do that? He refused to say that today. He said it's not a vote of confidence in his leadership if when the vote does come to the House of Commons next week. And he refused again to answer questions about what happens if this doesn't get through the House of Commons. Will he call an election? He refused to answer that question too.
And significant that he didn't say no, I suppose. Significant. I don't think he even gave a negative answer. There's the blackbird. He didn't even give a negative answer to the question of whether or not he might have turned it into a vote of no confidence, or did I miss that bit?
He said no to that point. It was a little bit clear. He mumbled.
Yes,
it was a little bit unclear, but he did say no. Okay. I don't see this as a vote of confidence in my government. But I think that's not going to stop Conservative MPs from worrying next week. Well, actually, if I vote against this, am I going to lose the Conservative whip, or is it got to a point where a lot of them are standing down? A lot of them don't care. A lot of them are very frustrated with the government. They do not feel that they're doing enough on legal migration. Are they going to align with the Suella squad, with the Robert Jenricks, or not?
It also perhaps pushes him into a place, if he were to defy a European court ruling, it pushes him into a place that Rwanda might not tolerate, doesn't it? I mean, there are quite a lot of known unknowns, aren't there, here?
Yeah, I think so. And I think there is a risk that if Rishi Sunak and whoever the immigration minister is at the time, it could be someone else by that time, who knows, decides exactly, who knows, it could be anyone. The fact is now he's got two, so if he loses one, it doesn't matter because he's got another backup, so it's fine. If they at the time decide not to pull the trigger, as it were, or they decide to do so and essentially block those. It's called a Section 39 order. If it comes from a European court, if he does that, will that be too much for Rwanda to bear? Will they say, actually, no, we're not part of this. We wanted to abide by international law, and we do feel that doing so would be taking it too far. We saw that message from the Rwandan government come out last night that they don't want to be involved in anything that does break the law, and that's a bit of a sticky position for Rishi Sunak to be in, especially considering Rwanda's record on this point.
Well, with a normal government, you'd presume that had already been clarified, perhaps by James Cleverly on his visit this week, but with this government, I don't think you can take that sort of thing for granted. Do we have any indication of what the numbers are like? I mean, how likely is this? It was fairly pathetic to keep talking about the Labour Party. They've made their position crystal clear on this issue, and indeed on this bill. But do we know what the numbers are like in terms of a possible embarrassment for Sunak next week?
I think it will probably just be a core group of supporters of Suella Braverman supporters, of Robert Jenrick supporters, that the government will be worried about, and whether that rebellion spreads any further than that.
So not worried about people who think it's gone too far, worried about legislating to essentially change reality, but people who don't think it's gone far enough are the big threat to Sunak.
Yeah, exactly. I think that Rishi Sunak thinks he has got his One Nation Conservatives, the more moderate wing of the party, on side, the Alex Chalk, the Justice Secretary, on board with this, Victoria Prentice, the Attorney General, apparently on board with this too. The moderate wing of the party seem very much to be okay with the way that this is going. What the Prime Minister, I think, is more worried about is that right wing of the party, and that's exactly what it was. This press conference was aimed at them. He was saying, I've gone as far as I can and I can't do any more. This is the toughest piece of legislation that's been brought forward. You have to back me. This is your only option. And it's not quite like the Brexit votes of previous days where, you know, if the hardliners didn't get what they wanted, they would have a no-deal Brexit. It's not like that situation. It's if you don't pass this, then nothing happens at all. So yes, it's the right wing of his party he's worried about. Are there that many? I think potentially 20 to 30 of that core supporters, but will they vote against it? I feel like probably not. I feel like they may abstain against it, but in terms of actually not passing, the numbers aren't looking fantastic for Rishi Sunak right now, but I don't believe that it's probably enough to bring it down.
Bit early for this question, and it's the last one. Is his position weaker or stronger than it was at 9 o'clock this morning?
I think possibly not much changed in my book. I think we'll have to see what Tory backbenchers make of this speech, and obviously they will be scrutinising the legislation when it does come to the House of Commons today. We're expecting those debates to start, but yes, those votes not expected until next week. So I reckon we've got probably 2 to 3 more days of feverish speculation, briefings to newspapers, and general chit-chat from the Tory backbenchers before they have to make this decision about whether they feel that they can support it or not.
Natasha Clark, great stuff, live, as I say, from Downing Street, where she was among the many esteemed UK political journalists not afforded a question, while some joker from GBB's was. But that is very much the priorities of the current Prime Minister and the direction of democratic traffic. Listen, we've got a bit of time. I want to catch up with what Boris Johnson has been bloviating about at the COVID inquiry. And then, as things stand, no reason not to dive straight into Mystery Hour at 12 o'clock. But if you want to give me a quick response to that, some of you very, very worried, some of you very, very troubled by it. It may be that you shouldn't be. It certainly seems odd that we've turned into a country where the government now decides what is true and what is not by passing laws rather than relying upon the judiciary, on one of the great traditional checks and balances on power. But, you know, we don't want to get carried away. We don't want to indulge in hyperbole. But if you just tell me what you made of that, what your first thought is. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
38 minutes after 11 is the time. Nothing there to change yesterday's conclusion that Rishi Sunak looks like a man who would rather be anywhere else now. And I mean, I'm no fan of the man, but you can't blame him, can you? What an almighty mess he's found himself in. And Natasha Clark quite rightly reminding us that this is now a problem of people who don't think what he just said was vicious enough. Or extreme enough. Extreme is probably a fairer word to use. I think it's pretty vicious. You may not. So people who want him to go even further. Julian in Poole puts it best. Forgive me, James, I'm confused. Why on earth did Jenrick resign? How much further to the right could this bill possibly go? Don't need judges. I will decide what is safe and what is not safe. or at least Parliament will, and I can rely upon the votes of my people. And then, as someone has texted in an unsigned, Paige rather, has tweeted to say, do you think Rwanda will buy it? And that is what taking back control looks like. The Rwandan government will decide whether Rishi Sunak's last throw of the dice on so-called small boats, which constitute the tiniest fraction of our overall immigration figures and less than half of our so-called illegal immigration figures, by which it simply means people have come here via unsafe routes because all the safe ones have been closed. Whether or not Rishi Sunak's last throw of the dice on his pledge to stop the boats succeeds or fails depends entirely upon the whims and the wishes of a Rwandan regime. And even then, if they decide to let him crack on with this policy, you're looking at about 200 people out of a total this year so far in excess of 27,000. But the deterrent, 200 people get sent to Rwanda, 27,000 people decide not to try to cross the English Channel. That's the calculation. Maybe it'll work. Seems unlikely. A little bit of controversy over my amateur ornithology there while talking to Natasha Clark. The consensus, it was probably a ring-necked parakeet, which is, of course, itself an illegal immigrant to this country. But I think we can all agree it has successfully integrated. Alex is in Nottingham. Alex, what just happened?
I'm almost lost for words, but I'm horrified by what I just heard. My blood ran cold.
Why?
Because it's just so inhumane. Everything that he said. I agree with what you said earlier. I think it is vicious. We're not treating these. We're not treating immigrants, refugees like people anymore. They are just numbers.
Did you know there was a fascinating failure to acknowledge the existence of bona fide asylum seekers? I don't think he said a single word about people who are actually fleeing war and famine and persecution. He sought to portray every single person trying to come here via the only means available as being undeserving or unfit or worse.
Exactly, and he had phrases of using the excuse of modern slavery.
Yes.
An excuse of modern slavery, that's real for people.
Well, let's even pretend that some people are. Well, no, let's posit the possibility that some people are using it as an excuse, as a loophole. He didn't acknowledge the existence of people who aren't, of people who are being enslaved, of people who are being brought here under false pretenses and then put to work in brothels or sweatshops. They don't exist under this analysis.
He's just gloated about how he's found ways to get around having to acknowledge those people and acknowledge those circumstances and acknowledge their plight. And I just find it disgusting. I cannot believe that I'm hearing this from a leader of this country. It's terrifying, and it makes me not want to be here anymore, in all honesty. I'm going to wait for the election because I want to be here. I want to have my say and do what I can to change the tide if possible. But I feel despairing at times at the direction this has gone, and that even the people that interviewed him, no one was really challenging him on the heartlessness of what he's doing. And what really gets my goal is the idea he keeps saying, this is what the British people want.
Yes.
I understand the frustration of the British people. This is not what the British people care about. Maybe a small, mad minority. But this is not what our priorities are. Our priorities are, day-to-day living, being able to afford to heat our homes, feed our children.
Energy costs, NHS, policing, whatever it might be, it's hardly going to be at the top of anybody's, unless they're in a position of enormous privilege and comfort at the moment.
No, and if we are caring about the both, in my opinion, I'm caring about the people who are losing their lives. I want to help those people. I don't want to make their lives even worse.
The only sort of thing I'd mention is that there'll be, I don't know if they'll be listening anymore, but there certainly used to be people who listen to the programme who the more upset you are, or I am, the more delighted they will be. And it used to be a an unpleasant fringe of British politics, but it seems that is now the Conservative Party. The policies, the people they are speaking to, I mean, incredibly on their own benches, arguably even more so than among the British public, are the people who will relish the horror that you feel and relish the reasons behind your horror, which is the dehumanisation of desperate people. They love it.
And that's what really scares me, that these people are in power. That, we've allowed these people to climb to the top and be in charge and change laws so that they can spread their bile further.
Changing the laws is I mean, I think that's a remarkable. Maybe we need a constitutional lawyer or somebody to tell us that we can relax a little bit. We don't need to be quite as upset. But it seems to me that if a Prime Minister is prepared to change the law to render something not true, then everyone should be terrified, because, once that precedent is set, what on earth do they do next? Alex, thank you. It's 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 11:48. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We move now with a crunching gear change from the awfulness of the current Prime Minister to the awfulness of the last one but one. Don't forget Liz Truss. So easy to do. Just think of the lettuce. Boris Johnson has been giving more evidence to the COVID-19 inquiry, and Charlotte Lynch has been following every syllable.
I have, yes, and it began with questions about the Eat Out to Help Out scheme, of course now infamous, and it was, of course, inevitable that this was going to come up with the Prime Minister himself, the man who was the Prime Minister at the time, of course. Now, he said that he didn't think it was a gamble at the time. A message from Dominic Cummings was shown saying that the PM, Boris Johnson, is very keen on the vouchers idea, and Boris Johnson said it wasn't presented to him as something that was going to accelerate the spread of the virus. Of course, a reminder that Sir Patrick Vallance, the chief scientific advisor to the government at the time, has said in his own evidence that it did. He said, Boris Johnson said, it simply made sense of the freedoms that they were giving. But what he did say about the scheme, when questioned about whether it had been run by the scientists before it was implemented, Boris Johnson said he had simply assumed that they were aware of it.
In your statement, you do say in terms, the scheme was, quote, to use your words, properly discussed, including with Chris and Patrick.
I did say that, and that was my belief. And I don't understand how that. I don't understand how something as well publicised as that could have been smuggled past the scientific advice. I don't see how that could have happened.
So he said in his statement, it had been properly discussed with the Chief Medical Officer, Sir Chris Whitty, and the Chief Scientific Advisor, Sir Patrick Vallance, who have both given evidence to say that they had never seen the scheme before it was introduced. They were never asked about it, and they weren't able to give advice on it. Boris Johnson now is surprised to learn that he said, in his words, that it was smuggled past them, despite it being an issue, such a well-publicised...
So the suggestion that Sunak kind of just turned up on the telly one day, which is not a million miles away from what Patrick Vallance said. Sunak just turned up on the telly one day and said, well, hey, Eat Out to Help Out. Scientists are sitting at home going, oh, crikey, that's a bit bad. And Boris Johnson is going, well, the scientists must have known about it, otherwise it couldn't possibly have happened. God, I wonder who's in charge of this shower. And it was, of course, him.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And yeah, it was, it's increasingly looking like that is indeed the case, that it was announced without any clearance at all. And we'll hear from Rishi Sunak at the COVID inquiry on Monday. Lots of the questioning is expected to focus around that, of course. Now, it was also put to Mr. Johnson. They're going in chronological order, so we're now into September 2020, and messages were shown to the inquiry where he is clearly saying it's inevitable, we're going to get another wave, it's coming, and he said he knew that eventually we would have to go back into a lockdown, but the picture that's being painted is he's almost scrambling at this point to say what else can we do that doesn't involve a full lockdown, that allows us to get on top of this thing, and we of course ended up going for that that tier system, where some parts of the country were in tier 4, basically a full lockdown. Others, where the virus wasn't spreading as fast, they still had restaurants open and things like that in tier 2. But all of the scientific advice that's been put to him at the inquiry, all the advice that was given to him at that time, and messages have been shown saying, go early, go hard, we can get on top of it, learn the lesson from March. And Sage had advised a circuit breaker in September. Boris Johnson was saying he'd wanted to see more evidence about how successful that would be. He didn't know whether it would work and whether it eventually they would just have to go into full lockdown anyway. And so he said he didn't think it was fair to put the whole country in lockdown when the virus was spreading more rapidly in areas like Leicester, where we saw local lockdowns, and the northwest. And that's why he went for tiers. But Hugo Keith's line of questioning was heading for this claim that Boris Johnson argued repeatedly to let the virus rip. And it was put to him that the reason that he suddenly stopped being guided by the science, that he wasn't in September 2020 guided by all of this scientific advice to go for a circuit breaker, was because he privately held a view, which he denies, that the elderly had a good innings anyway, and the virus should be allowed to let rip through the country. Here is that confrontation Hugo Keith put to him, and all of those Patrick Vallance diary entries from separate meetings across the course of 2020, where he alleges the Prime Minister had argued for that approach.
The Prime Minister meeting begins to argue for letting it rip, saying, yes, there will be more casualties, but so be it. They've had a good innings. We should let it rip a bit. 150. He's obsessed with older people accepting their fate. 230. Obsessed with the average age of death being 82, which is longer, you believe, than the average life expectancy. Get COVID, live longer, you said. 245. You say at the bottom of the page, according to Sir Patrick Vallance, we're in a really tough spot, a complete shambles. I really don't want to do another national lockdown. You are told that if you want to go down this route of letting go, you need to tell people. You need to tell them you're going to allow people to die. Was your position, Mr. Johnson, that in light of your views secretly held about people dying having reached their time anyway, that you were obliged to reject the advice of your advisors that there be a circuit breaker?
No.
That there be no national lockdown until the last possible moment?
No.
And that you would try a tier system?
No. No. So the implication of the implication that you're trying to draw from those conversations is completely wrong.
And you go.
The implication that you're trying to draw from fairly clear statements written in diaries by Patrick Vallance is wrong.
By the man who was the chief scientific officer to the government at the time, Sir Patrick Vallance, who was making these notes at the end of every day. Boris Johnson gave an extremely passionate defence of that. Ultimately, he said he was simply trying to look at every possible avenue, every possible outcome. But we saw in those diaries there, it got to the point where he was told by the scientists, OK, well, if you're going to go down this route, you need to tell people that that's what you are doing, and you are going to let people die. Now, of course, that's not what ended up happening. But Boris Johnson gave his defence.
We'll hear that in a second. I just want to remind everybody listening that Boris Johnson has, off the top of my head, also given extremely passionate defences against the accusation that there were any parties in Downing Street, that he attended any parties in Downing Street, that he knew about there being any parties in Downing Street, that he lied to the House of Commons about parties in Downing Street, that he knew that Chris Pincher had a reputation as a serial sex pest when he appointed him Deputy Chief Whip, that he didn't lie to the House of Commons, that he hadn't been found in contempt of the House of Commons, and even when he was found to have been in contempt of Parliament, he gave a very passionate defence of the position that he hadn't been found to be in contempt of Parliament. Just a little bit of context.
If you look at what we actually did, never mind the accounts that you have culled from people's jottings from meetings that I've been in, if you look at what I actually said and what I actually did, and there is abundant quotation from me, millions of words that I spoke in Parliament or in press conferences or whatever. If you look at what we actually did, we went into lockdown as soon as we could the first time round, and we sensibly went for a regional approach when the disease picked up again, and then again went into lockdown on the 30th, 31st of October. And I think, frankly, it does not do justice to what we did, our thoughts, our feelings, my thoughts, my feelings, to say that we were remotely reconciled to fatalities across the country.
So again, classic Boris Johnson. In order to establish whether or not these reports of what I said in private are true, you must listen to what I said in public. It's great, isn't he? Is that the highlights? He's still going, isn't he?
Those are the highlights for now, yeah. Still going for the rest of the day. I mean, he said he was ultimately very sad that the tier system didn't end up working, and we ended up back in a full national lockdown with schools closed again in January 2020. But he said it was worth a try, and at least he tried it. And again, saying it was his job to hear all approaches. He didn't deny holding meetings with scientists who did hold the view of herd immunity, that the virus should be allowed to spread through the population in some form. And his defence is ultimately that's not the approach that we took. But that line of questioning from Hugo Keith KC that he was trying to get to the bottom of, did he not take that scientific advice to go for a circuit breaker in September 2020 because he was taking the let it rip approach?
Yeah. How much longer? Just close of play today, is it? Or
round about 4:30, yeah, close of play today, or round about then. It depends when they get through it. Tomorrow not sitting,
They're
and
off
then
on
we've
Friday,
got
and then Sunak's in on Monday.
Sunak on Monday.
Oh, what a time to be alive. Did you see the tears yesterday? Did you see the Johnson sort of tearing up?
I didn't see tears, well, because I don't think that there were any. He got a bit choked. He got a bit choked,
yes.
But I didn't see tears come out of his eyes.
Known in the trade, I think, as doing a Hancock. Was it? Doing a Matt Hancock?
Wiping
And on we go. Thank you, Charlotte Lynch. Perfect coverage. It is coming up to 12 o'clock. Tempting though it is to wade into the news that continues breaking around us. It's like being on a beach during some sort of storm. I'm going to do Mystery Hour. I need a break, frankly. I think the mental toll that this cavalcade of catastrophe and chaos takes on all of us makes the weekly light relief that Mystery Hour serves up all the more precious. So if you've got a question that needs an answer, a mystery that needs a solution, an enigma that needs unravelling, or a riddle that needs solving, then you've come to the right place. The number, as always, is 0345 6060 973. I love that even as we navigate this madness, some people have been waiting for 10 minutes already to get their question on the board.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 4 minutes after 12 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we will just take a step back for an hour from this absolute skip fire of a political situation, political landscape. Absolutely shocking at the moment. Wherever you turn, I've got various screens in my studio. It turns to the left, there's Rishi Sunak insisting that they can make black white by changing the law and ignoring the judges, the coloured judges who decide what's black and what's white. We don't need to listen to them anymore. I will decide what is black and what is white. And you see that black thing over there? That's white now because I say so. Turn the other way, there's Boris Johnson. The tears of a clown, you could call it. The approach that he's taken to the tier system of lockdowns. And he'll get away with it. He always does, you know. One of life's great truisms. So thank goodness, thank all the lords for Mystery Hour. Your weekly opportunity to achieve the sort of satisfaction ordinarily available on your radio dial. I think, should I just crack on this week? You can tell I'm a little fatigued by the toll that the news coverage takes on me sometimes. When it's all happening live, I'm even more fatigued than I am usually. But let me just remind you of a couple of things. Thing one, you can win a Mystery Hour board game, which, you know, it's December the 7th now. If you're struggling for that Christmas present and you've already bought my book, How They Broke Britain, then the Mystery Hour board game could be just the thing, couldn't it? For you know, her indoors or or him indoors, or whoever it is that needs either a book that explains. Actually, Mystery Hour is for the whole family. The Mystery Hour ball game is just great fun. And you can find out more about it at mysteryhour.co.uk, or it's all the usual places online to purchase. But mysteryhour.co.uk is my is my recommendation. But crucially, make my favourite contribution of the week, and you can win one. That's it. It'll be with you. It'll be with you by the weekend, probably, give or take, depending on the Royal Mail. So there it is. Full terms and conditions are at lbc.co.uk. 6 minutes after 12 is the time. I think that's all the housework we need to do, isn't it? I don't think we need to do anything else. We'll just crack on. Iona is in Hanworth. Iona, what would you like to say?
Oh, hello, James.
Oh, hang on. I got it wrong there. You can tell I'm a bit... I said question or answer, Iona. Question or answer.
Sorry.
No, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Okay, marvellous. What is it?
Sorry, I'm feeling a wee bit nervous.
Why?
So please forgive me.
Why?
Oh, I'm terrified, James.
That's all.
I haven't been on radio that much. Only twice in my life, and you're the second time.
Well, I mean, I won't feel offended by the fact that you chose to make your debut with somebody else, but I promise that this will be a pleasurable experience.
Oh, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Right, so my question is this, James. Is empathy inherited or developed through experiences?
Ooh, crikey. That's a good question. Why do you ask?
I ask because I'm an empath. My mother's an empath, my uncle and my grandmother, and she was with us. And I'd love to know if it's the nature or nurture debate in terms of empathy.
I think as with almost all nature and nurture debates, it'll turn out to be a little bit of both. For people who don't know, an empath is someone with particularly high levels of attunement, if you like, to other people's feelings and emotions.
Yes, definitely.
How do you know you're an empath, if that's not a silly question to ask?
Well, I definitely absorb the emotions of other people. I can feel their pain, their happiness, and I can understand. I think I'm very blessed to have this ability in that I can emotionally empathise with others.
So it's like the opposite of being Suella Braverman.
Ah, good one.
You can only come so far with me on that because you even have some empathy for her.
I do.
Yes.
Well, to an extent. Well,
yes. No, fair enough. I find this fascinating. I don't know if anyone will be qualified to answer the question of how hereditary is empathy, but which is how I'm going to phrase it. But I think it has to be, because I think the opposite. I think the opposite has to be hereditary as well, because otherwise you'd have a sort of, utilitarianism or humanity would have rendered everybody empathetic by now. But because it would be in the general interest of the greater good, and yet, of course, if you inherit more sociopathic tendencies, if you inherit a psychological absence of conscience or an ability to do terrible things without worrying about it very much, you get to profit and triumph in the world, whether you're a medieval warlord or whether you're a hedge funder in the 21st century or a member of Rishi Sunak's cabinet. We reward lack of empathy, so it must be inherited. And if that's inherited, then the opposite must be inherited too. But that's just me thinking out loud about one of my favourite subjects. So we shall see. We shall endeavour to find out. Thank you, Iona. 9 minutes after 12 is the time. I think it comes up in a book by a woman that taught me at the LSE called Helena Cronin, a book called The Ant and the Peacock, which looks at inherited traits that are behavioural rather than physical, a sort of evolution of some of Richard Dawkins' work. Siobhan's in Bristol. Question or answer, Siobhan? Hello,
Hi,
Siobhan.
Jane.
Hello.
Sorry. Right, so I've got a nice dog-related question for today's Mystery Hour.
Marvellous. Go on.
So what I'd like to know is why have dogs got jagged lips? So, if you slightly pull down the outside of their mouth on the outside, inside they've got they've got a lip and it's really jaggedy, and it looks like really teeny shark teeth, but obviously.
And what's yours
soft.
like? What's a human's one like? I've never done that. I've got a dog. I don't think I've ever. Is it? You mean the inner lip?
So if you just so you've got their muzzle and their nose and everything. So their bottom lip, if you just pull it down slightly, you'll see that inside they've got a jagged lip that goes round.
Right.
Obviously it's the inside, so you don't really see it that often. Except some dogs I've noticed sometimes have it protruding a bit on the outside, so it comes out a bit. But you'll know what I mean when you actually look at your dog.
I will. I shall have a look later.
Yeah.
My dog makes an appearance on the Times Literary Supplement podcast this week, actually, because she started barking in the background while I was trying to sound all clever. Speaking of how people sound, you didn't grow up in Bristol.
No, I'm from Birmingham.
I was going to say you grew up in my neck of the woods. I can detect it in the background. It always like my little antennae, my West Midlands antennae are twitching. So it's like a bumpy, jagged, even like mini teeth, like
teeny weeny, like jaggedy, soft teeth.
All right. Well, it may have something to do with digestion or breaking stuff down.
So I didn't know. Yeah, whether they still need it, or it's something that's left over from evolution, or whether they still need it now, or just why they've got it.
You're on?
Yeah, and also it's my birthday today, so I'd really like to know the answer.
Well, happy birthday to
Thank
you,
you.
Siobhan. Seriously, is it a big one?
No, it's 49.
Oh, crikey, just knocking at this time next year, eh?
Yeah, exactly.
Party time. Well, have a lovely day. I hope someone spoils you. And if not, then you'll have to make do with an answer to your question. And, of course, a desperate tug on my heartstrings there when it comes to who gets the free Mystery Hour board game at 1 o'clock today. Mitchell's in Colchester. Mitchell, question or answer?
Hi, James. There's a question for you.
Carry on.
Why is it that some foods, when you eat them, affect your mouth, like spicy foods, like curries, yet other foods, like wasabi, affect your nose?
It's a good question.
Chili.
No, I know exactly what you're describing. I just didn't quite. So what else? Mustard, I suppose. Is more
mustard,
nose.
Horseradish.
Well, that's wasabi. It's the same thing, I think.
Oh, yeah, I suppose, yes.
But mustard, wasabi, something where they both can make your eyes water, but one is coming from the nose area and one is coming from the taste buds, coming from the mouth area.
Yeah, it's always baffled me. You can drink milk, can't you, to kind of like soothe your tongue when you eat a curry.
Yeah.
But there's nothing really you can do to kind of help your nose.
That's baffled me, that does as well now. You could try snorting milk, I suppose, but that's probably not going to solve it. No, I like that a lot. And it is... pungency. I'm trying to think if the answer's going to occur to me if I just wibble on for long enough, but I don't think it is. Right, you're on. Yeah, why does some foods affect our nose more than our mouths? And thinking of most obviously, good old English mustard or some wasabi or horseradish sauce. Wasabi, I think, comes from the horseradish root, but I may have got that wrong as well. It is 12:13. How hereditary is empathy? Why is a dog's inner lower lip so jagged? And why do some hot foods affect our nose more than our mouth? David is in Stevenage. David, question or answer?
Question, please, James.
Carry on.
So, I've got black hair, so grey hairs stand out a mile away. So I dye my hair on the regular to sort of hide my age a little bit.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's very honest of you.
Exactly.
There are other people listening to this conversation.
Yes, completely. But they've not got my surname, so I'm still safe.
That's very true.
Yes, exactly. So the black hair dye will stick to my ears, my forehead, the back of my neck, and it will be there for about 24 hours. However, on your scalp, it doesn't stick at all. Why is that?
Because there's so much hair in the way.
So I've got patches of alopecia, so I can see my scalp very, very easily. So when I go to dye my hair, those patches are still, skin coloured, absolutely undyed. So it's nothing to do with the oil in your hair.
So the bits that do go, the forehead and the tops of your ears do carry they hold the dye.
Exactly.
But your patches, your hairless patches, do not hold the dye.
All.
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, unless you're weird and no one else recognises what you're describing.
It could just be me. But
the catch is that's relevant, actually. The patches are relevant. All right, I'll find out.
Fantastic, thank you.
You're very welcome. 12:15 is the time. Why does hair dye affect some parts of our skin and not others? Why do some foods affect our nose more than our mouth? Why do dogs have a jagged gum or lower inside lip? You know what Siobhan was talking about, even if I'm not 100% sure. And how hereditary is empathy? That's almost a PhD thesis. It's 12:15.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
17 minutes, after 12 is the time. Lots of questions on the board, lots of room for more. Let's go to Edgware next. David's there. David, question or answer?
Hi, James. It's a question.
Yes.
So firstly, I have to say I think there's a good chance you'll say that there's no way we can really know the answer to this. But the question is regarding pain thresholds. Everyone has different pain thresholds and tolerances.
Yes.
So my question is, if someone has, say, a higher pain threshold than me, is it a case that they are feeling the same amount of pain, but they are better at processing it and dealing with it? Or is the pain that I would feel, they're actually feeling less pain than me, if that makes sense? Let's say, for example, there are these electric machines that can give you like an electric current and you can turn it up and down.
Yeah.
So if my threshold was I can't take more than 5, and the guy next to me can take 7, does that 7 feel like only 3 to him? Or does it still feel like 7, but he can just handle that?
That's a good. I mean, how would we work it out? How would we know?
Well, this is the thing. Yeah, I don't know if there's any way of knowing.
You reach a point where he can't bear it either, so you turn it up and you turn it up and you turn it up until he pulls himself out of the out of the apparatus. What would he be feeling there compared to what you? I mean, what measure would we be?
I don't know. I wondered if there's like a scientific measure that they can see, how much pain you're experiencing.
Well, hang on. So, like, I'm thinking about eating chilies.
Well, it's funny you say that because that's actually why my initial question was because I can handle chili and my wife not so much.
Yeah.
And we sort of said, well, it's kind of like a pain threshold. And then I said, well, why not apply it just to pain generally? But actually, I'm listening to old episodes of your Mystery Hour in my
fantastic.
car, and I literally just yesterday heard someone ask about chilies, and they answered that, but that was more to do with taste buds on your tongue. So I don't know if it's relevant.
So you've got
so
more.
That's why I changed them more.
So
yeah, they said the answer. I think it was a definitive was to do with the number of taste buds you've got on your tongue. But pain generally, I don't know.
No, nor do I, and neither do I know whether or not, as you did acknowledge at the beginning, whether or not that's something that's going to be possible to answer. So 2 people being exposed to the same level of pain, one tolerating it much more than the other, are they, quotes, feeling, end quotes, the same pain?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, for example, my mum has always said she's got a very low pain threshold, and you can almost, when I was a kid, I used to go up and you'd sort of just prod them in the side very gently, and she would always say, "Oh no, it really hurts," and I'd think, don't be silly, that can't be hurting. You must be exaggerating it. But then, as you get older, you sort of think, well, maybe it does. Maybe to her, that is the same as me being, punched in the face or something.
Yes.
And I don't know if we can know it, but I'd just be interested if anyone might.
We can ask, and we will. Thank you, David. 20 minutes after 12 is the time. 2 people feeling the same, being exposed to the same stimulus, so the same level of shock, for example, in an experiment, or being hit with the same momentum, being hit equally hard. One of them feels it. Well, one of them is a lot more relaxed about it than the other, in a lot less pain than the other. But are they receiving the same level of pain? I do understand the question, but like David, I'm not sure how the answer would be framed. Oscar's in Winchester. Oscar, question or answer?
Question, please, James.
Carry on.
Why is it when someone says say something that can produce a smell, on my next in-breath through my nose, I can smell that thing, just for the one breath, for the one sniff, sorry.
All these questions are the same this week, aren't they? They're all I mean, this is a bit weird.
Taste-orientated.
Well, we've got pain thresholds, noses. A dog's gums is a bit different, I suppose. There's too many noses so far. Anyway, go on. So what? You can smell it on your next nasal inhalation?
Yeah, for example, if they're saying, oh, what do we want for dinner? And say, a pesto pasta, do we want to have onion in it? Immediately, I can smell onion in that next breath in through my nose, and then not through the others. And it happens probably twice a week. So it's not consistent.
I don't understand the question.
Why does it happen, is the question.
Why can you smell things?
Why can I smell something which isn't physically there in front of me? It's triggered through a memory or a thought, or someone saying something to me. It's not actually physically in front of me.
Oh, so someone just says, God, those hot dogs last week were delicious, and you get a whiff of onion.
Or a whiff of hot dog, yeah.
Okay. Well, it's just a sense memory, isn't it?
Well,
why would it be any different?
If it was more common, wouldn't it happen to more people?
Well, no, I don't think it is that common. I think you're a bit special.
Well, thanks, James.
You're very welcome. Because
I mean, I would be interested if anyone has any other thoughts on it.
Everyone's got a sound memory, haven't they? But probably everyone hasn't, actually. Some people can't imagine a piece of music in their head, but most of us can, or I can at least. There you go. But a smell Like, I don't think I've got the ability to remember smells, but you do. So, I mean, are you a one-off is the question, really? Well, are you the only one? Are you a super smeller? Do you have particularly sensitive sense of smell?
No, not at all. I've got sinusitis most of the time.
Okay.
So, no.
So there's a lot of money in being a super smeller, you know?
Well, I'm a gardener, so
go and work
no much choice in that.
No, of course. Right, okay, I'll find out for you. And how often does it happen? You say about once or twice a week?
Yeah, about that.
That's really interesting. Thank you, mate. I like that question, and I didn't at first, so I apologise for being a bit. What's the word? Previous. Being a bit previous. Turning my nose up at your question. Very rude of me. Noses and schnozzes. So Oscar's ability to smell things that aren't there. What's going on, and how common is it? David wants to know about the pain. The other David wants to know about hair dye. Mitchell wants to know about spicy foods that go up your nose. I don't think wasabi is horseradish. It's Japanese horseradish, so it's from the same family as horseradish and mustard, which are the only other things I could think of that had the effect that Mitchell described. The effect of some hot food, pungent food rather than spicy food, goes up your nose rather than activating your taste buds. Why? And then you got the dog's gob and the hereditary nature of empathy. Natalie is in Addleston. Natalie, question or answer?
Answer, please.
Carry on.
To do with hair dye. So
yes.
Generally, when you wash hair dye off, you emulsify the hair dye into itself on the scalp where you don't on your face.
So
if you emulsify, if you went into a hair salon, they would apply a small amount of water and emulsify it into your skin, which is why when you go to a salon you get less stain.
Right.
And that's why it doesn't stain the scalp. But some high pigment colours would. So if it was very vibrant red, some women would get like
a red scalp. I've seen that actually.
Yeah.
So
but generally that's why.
So when you dye your hair, you wash afterwards, do you?
Yeah. So you apply the dye to your head, and then before you're washing it off, you apply a small amount of water and emulsify it with your hands, which is not great if you've not got gloves on.
Right.
And then continue to rinse as normal and then wash.
Well,
and
that was a stupid question then. The reason why it's stuck to his neck and his ears is because he hasn't washed them.
He hasn't emulsified it.
He hasn't emulsified it. So he hasn't put So there's two bits, is there? You put the dye on and then you've got another sachet with emulsifier in it, have you?
No. So you use your hands to rub it into itself. That's the emulsifying
Just to
part.
activate it, as it were. Is it?
Yeah.
Are you sure emulsifier is the right word to use in this context?
I don't know if it's the right term, but I would say you rub the tint and it would removes tint. So the hair dye is the tint and you'd rub it into itself and it will remove it.
Oh, you're just making it into an emulsion. That's what emulsify means.
No, maybe not then.
That's why you've thrown me. That's why you've thrown me a bit. So you've got the dye is on your hair, you rub it in on of itself, and then you rinse it out.
Yeah.
Whereas the bits that have reached your tips of your ears and around your forehead, you haven't done
rubbed it into itself.
Yeah, okay, that works. Yeah. Qualifications?
Hairdresser.
Oh, well, that'll do. Yeah, right, get it now. Round of applause for Natalie, please. Well done. First round of applause of the day. 12:26, that's quite late to get the first round of applause out of the traps. Hassan is in Slough. Hassan, question or answer?
Question, please, James.
Carry on.
How did cartographers map out the world before the invention of satellites, hot air balloons or airplanes?
Well, how do you think?
I don't know. I mean, you would have a compass. I'm sure a compass was invented a long time ago. You'd map out the lines as the direction of the needle changes, but you'll need a very, very long piece of paper to map out the entire continent.
So do you mean what are you most intrigued by? Distances, how they knew distances, or how they knew the shape of
shapes?
You can do that with your. They used to use a lot of ropes and chains for the distances to get the distances right.
Yeah.
But the mapping stuff, I read about this quite a lot. People would just walk around making maps.
But how? Because modern day maps will be made based on satellite images.
Yeah, but the old maps aren't as good as the modern day maps, mate, are they? So, I mean, they're a bit rubbish quite often.
Good approximations, like India. There was a good approximation of the shape, Africa. So
they'd have done it from the coast. They'd have gone out in a boat and drawn back what they could see.
Okay, so suppose we've done that. We're on a boat and we see the contours.
Yeah.
But then, as you go around, how do you know what the shape is going to be as you go around, let's say, the entire coastline of the UK? How can you know?
Angles, innit? You calculate the angles of things.
Yes, that can be done. So the compass and then an angle, measuring whatever ropes or chains.
Triangulation, in a sense, isn't it?
Triangulation would be more for signals, wouldn't it? You can triangulate signals, but not.
No, you do it also for getting for working out where one point is by using the location of other points of known points.
That's more of an astronomical phenomenon, I think. But the parallax method,
it would work on Earth as well. It would work on the ground. I think it would. It's trigonometry.
Yeah, there is trigonometry, but it still doesn't explain how you work out the shape of the entire. I don't know how many thousands of miles or hundreds of miles the UK is.
I think you'd be surprised at the sheer numbers of people that were engaged in the process. I mean, think of an ordnance survey map, aren't we, really? Which is quite detailed, quite technical. But I'm listening. There's no earthly way I'm going to give myself a round of applause for all that nonsense. But I think I think the scale of the job is probably what will surprise us, as opposed to now when you just need to throw a satellite up in the air and Bob's your uncle. So how did they make maps? Even before cameras existed, never mind satellites, before anything existed, anything technology. How did they map? What did Ptolemy do? You might ask. Thank you, Hassan. It's 12:30. Lottie Morley has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:34 is the time. Keith thinks they use tracing paper. They just got a massive piece of tracing paper and put it over the land and then just drew around the edges. How'd you do hills? How'd you do hills? Because you've got hills on ordnance survey maps. I think you've got trigonometry points on top of hills, which adds to my triangulation point that Hassan was so dismissive of. But how did they make maps before we had any of the modern technology? What's going on when Oscar can smell things just when people say the word and the thing that he can smell is not actually in his presence? How do you know how much pain? Two people exposed to the same pain stimulus, one of them finds it quite easy to cope with and the other one doesn't. What are they feeling the same? That question, we're not going to get an answer, David, but it's like a philosophical conundrum. We've done the hair dye question. I hope that was to the other David's satisfaction. Why do things like wasabi and mustard go up your nose when most pungent foods affect your mouth? What's going on with the dog's lower lip on the inside? Why is it all jagged? And how hereditary is empathy? Grace is in Greenwich. Grace, question or answer?
Answer.
Fantastic. Carry on, Grace.
Yeah. Hi, James. So happy to be on the radio. So my answer is about the question about pain.
Yes.
So in the clinical practical study of pain is, as far as scientific evidence based, it is subjective. So a patient reports a pain on a scale from 0 to 10.
Yes.
I say my pain is a 9. That is my sensation of pain. Someone, let's say, had the same situation happen and they said their sensation is a 4. So there's no way of physically measuring pain in patients. Otherwise, we could boot out all of the drug-seeking drug addicts at A&E who come forward and say, oh, my pain is killing me.
Of course.
Otherwise, we'd be able to do that test to establish. So pain is affected by a number of things. How much sleep we've had last night, if we've had a good meal. If our mindset, say, for the pain or stimulus has been addressed. The example that the gentleman gave on the phone about the 2 people being electrocuted. Let's say you have 2 people, 2 different pain thresholds. One person's done an hour of meditation. They've gotten a good night's sleep. They know what's going to happen. They're prepared. They're resilient. Their experience of the pain, in theory, would be less, practically, whereas the person who would be less prepared for that.
Of course, yes.
So,
that's like you gird your loins, don't you? Or you stiffen your sinews, or whatever you want to call it.
Exactly. And then there's other things. There's neurodivergent people. We know that they have lower tolerance for sensory stimuli, including pain. There's fibromyalgia. There's so many varying.
Even things like women generally have the shower hotter than men do. Even things like that.
Yes. So the answer is there is no real answer other than it is truly subjective and it is affected by the environment. You know, we look after, I'm a nurse by trade, if you want to know, I get the answer from, but we look after patients after operation. They've been, beaten up. They're on the ward. Their threshold for pain is very low because of what they've already, their pain basically cap has been exceeded.
Oh, wow.
And that's why, so it has to do with that, and it is a really subjective.
What a lovely answer. I think you've already...
Yeah.
What are your qualifications, Grace? I think you've already told us.
Yeah, I've been 10 years a nurse.
Well, thank you very much for all that you do.
Yes, thank you. Nice to speak to you.
It's a pleasure to speak to you. Have a round of applause on us.
Oh, thank you.
Jenna is in Beaconsfield. Jenna, question or answer?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Question, please.
Carry on.
Yes, so I wanted to know, why are some places, or, most places, translated? So, for example, Napoli is Napoli, but we call it Naples.
Yeah.
And London is called Londres in French.
Londres.
And Londra. But, but why is that? Why isn't it just stay the same? Because it's a place name, so I don't understand why it's translated. Just wondered if anyone had any thoughts on that.
It's actually a really good question, isn't it?
And like Ibiza is Ibiza, like it's not even spelt Ibiza, and yet we call it Ibiza.
Well,
so I think that might be with Catalan and Spanish and being all different as well.
But called it in your own language. I mean, it's more. I don't know that the different pronunciations is a different question. It's when you've got actually different words, isn't it? So you visit a city in Italy, and you say to the people that live there, "Where am I?" And they say Napoli, and you come home and you say, "Oh, I had a great time in Naples." That's very odd. Now you come to think of it, isn't it?
It is, but it's like an official. I think the airport is Naples Airport. It's not Napoli Airport, so it's
No, it is. Oh well, no. That airports are different. That's the international language of aero whatever. That is going to be in English. Wherever you are in the world, there's going to be an English code name for the airport. I think all pilots have to speak English. All air traffic controllers have to speak English.
But why do we need to change it to?
I don't know.
We can pronounce Napoli. It doesn't.
No, I know. Let's not get hung up on Napoli. I'm struck by Londres as well, because you bump into someone on the tube. You say to some French bloke, "How long are you here for?" And he says, "Je suis en Angleterre pour 2 semaines." And you say, "No, you're not here in England." He goes, No, je suis en Angleterre. And you go, "Hang on, mate, I'm English. This is England. Why are you calling it Angleterre? Why are they calling it Angleterre?" I said, well, maybe they named it without visiting
Maybe it just sounds nicer.
Well, Angleterre literally means the land of the Angles, doesn't it? And England means the land of the Angles as well, but we've got different ways of saying angle and different ways of saying land. It's a good question.
That is a translation then? That is
it is a form of translation.
Attempt of a translation, yes. Yeah.
But then I don't think Naples means anything. I don't think it has a Italia. Where are you going? I'm going to Italia. No, you're not. You're going to Italy. Oh, I shall ask. Yeah, it's a good question, That's a great question. I don't know how often you listen to Miss Chat. I met lovely Mark in County Durham, who usually answers these questions for us. I actually met him in person the other day. Came to an event in Manchester. I wouldn't be surprised if he fancies this one.
Oh, wow. Well, fingers crossed, Mark's listening.
Exactly that. 20 to 1. Thank you, Jenna. I love that question. Why do we translate place names? And also, why do they translate place names? Who do they think they are? Calling London Londres. Well, even the blooming Romans were at it with Londinium, although I don't know what we call. I would think that was probably the first thing it was called. Anyway, there's lots to get your teeth into. Alex is in Dulwich. Alex, question or answer?
Hi, James. It's an answer.
Carry on, Alex.
To the dog's lips question.
Excellent.
Yeah, so I'm a dog walker, and I'm looking at my dog's lips right now, and they are called ruga, and they assist basically in gripping of things. So when a dog's carrying something, it just adds a little bit extra grip. I believe it's similar to how, like, when your hands are in water for a while, how you go wrinkly, so it assists in grip.
I like that, and it makes sense actually. So it's just an evolutionary sort of development. The dogs that were better at gripping things because they had a freakish lip managed to had more action and more puppies and passed on the freakish lip to more and more puppies and dogs.
Yeah, exactly. I think it also coincides with the smaller the teeth. So the teeth are smaller towards the back, and that's where the ridges tend to start. So I think it's when the teeth are smaller, the lips kind of fill in a little bit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Qualifications, dog walker. And you've had a look. And you asked someone about it. How do you spell Ruga?
I think it's Ruga.
Ruga. I like that.
But I might have misremembered that.
Don't worry. Round of applause, please, for Alex. We'll put Alex next to Siobhan on the list because he answered her question. 12:42 is the time. Oh, I forgot. What was the name of that lovely nurse who answered the strength in the Grace, wasn't it? And who answered the hair dye question? The hairdresser in Addleston. Was it Natalie? Natalie in Addleston. Lovely stuff. Well done. Hugo's in Manchester. Hugo, question or answer?
It's an answer, James.
Carry on, Hugo.
I don't know if I'm going to be as eloquent as Grace, but...
You'll do great, I can tell.
In terms of empathy, there are two forms, I believe, cognitive empathy and emotional empathy.
Right.
So cognitive empathy is you can understand someone's perspective.
Yes.
And you can kind of rationalise and understand what it's like to be in their shoes, and maybe even understand their feelings. But emotional empathy, you actually have a shared experience, emotional experience. You actually feel distress for someone else's pain, and you are more likely to have a willingness to help somebody.
Yes.
Now, I
think Iona was talking about the second kind, wasn't she, really?
Yeah, I guess so. But so in that case, so I believe, and there was a study done by one of these genetic companies that tell you about your backstory.
Oh yeah,
that there is a gene for empathy, but it only really accounts for about 10% of your emotional response, and the other 90% is learned behaviour. And that is backed up by the fact that I think in most research, women are normally identified as being more able to empathise than, say, men.
So about 10% inherited and 90% learned.
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Sounds about right. Qualifications?
I did some study into performance management of sports people.
Oh, yeah.
And I interviewed a neuroscientist, and she told me all about it.
Makes sense. Thank you, Hugo. I'm going to take Colleen as well, who is on the same page, but you definitely get a round of applause.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Colleen, what would you like to add or challenge?
Yeah, well, I challenged that. I'd be going with the nurture.
Yeah, but he was saying 90% learning and 10%.
I didn't say learning.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'd actually talk about the male thing, though. Wait. So I've come from the point, our parents, growing up, our parents kind of lend us their mind. So if they've got a great ability, they got taught to empathise, they'll teach us how to do it. So as a little child, I fall over, bump, scrape my knees, they pick me up, they tell me, they help me understand what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, what I need, and learn about myself, and then I'm able to do it with somebody else. So nice. I have that. It's a lovely. It's the work of Peter Fonagy, who's brilliant, Anna Freud Centre, all that jazz, and Gabor Mate, who you've had on.
I have.
So
they give us their mind. Fascinating.
Yeah, I know, my hero. So if they can't do that, absolute hero. If they can't do that, if they haven't been taught empathy, then when we do fall over, they won't be attuned to us, so that we won't learn what we were feeling and what we needed. So we don't learn empathy, and we know many people who sadly have experienced that. I would say the male thing, I think boys generally, and this goes into the learned stuff, a boy falls over, more likely to get the message, you're fine, you're a lad, get on with it, big boys don't cry, blah-de-blah-de-blah. Boys don't get upset.
Yeah.
Come on.
Stiff upper lip.
Yeah, so
all
I
of that.
kind of push back.
As you speak, I'm looking at Boris Johnson, and I think that his attitude to COVID, it was caused by being told that emotional literacy is a weakness.
Exactly. Who attuned to him? I mean, we don't know, but what happened exactly? Did he feel seen?
You lead us into difficult territory now because
I'll stop.
No, because we end up feeling sorry for little baby Boris.
But we do, because that's wise compassion, James, and we do need to understand it.
You're not wrong.
That's the hard, and then that's where does it ever end? Exactly.
You're not wrong. You're a therapist, clearly.
I am a therapist,
and that's your qualification for answering this question.
I love this stuff. It's amazing because it helps us understand, as you always talk about, why people do what they do and why they don't.
Exactly that. And if you can understand why you do it, then you can, and if it's unhealthy, then you can work not to do it anymore.
And then you can talk it through and try and help people.
Exactly.
And then we all get on a lot better. And
under my glorious rule, everyone would have therapy, but it would only be compulsory for the people who don't think they need it.
Yeah, and it's really teaching as parents, bless them. If you're not attuned, you're busy, you're stressed, you didn't get it growing up, you struggle to give it to your kids, and we need to do a lot of work around families and all that jazz. That's where the future lies. So it's a big
lovely work, Colleen. Thank you. Round of applause.
Thank you.
No, thank you. Lovely stuff. I like that question, and I loved both the answers as well between them. Hugo and Colleen absolutely smashed that. It's 12:47.
James O'Brien on LBC. James O'Brien on LBC.
12:50 is the time. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. How did they make maps in the olden days? Why do we translate place names? Why, if you go to Italy and ask an Italian where you are, and he says Napoli or Roma, why do you come back and say Naples and or Rome? Why does Oscar smell stuff when it's not there, just if someone tells him about it? I love that one. And staying with noses, some pungent flavours go up our nose rather than affect our mouth. I'm thinking of mustard and wasabi and horseradish and the like. And we've done the dogs and we've done the empathy. Lovely work this week. Well done, everybody. Laura's at Enfield. Question or answer?
Hello. Hi, James. It's a question.
Carry on.
It's about door keys and like a Yale lock and key.
Right.
How many combinations there are for the key? Because we wondered if it's infinite. Infinite options, or is there somewhere that there are duplicate keys? And we wondered if there's a locksmith that could answer it. It's a question from my partner Danny, but I'm asking it.
Why can't Danny ask it himself?
He's driving.
Okay, so hello, Danny. So there must be it can't be infinite because it's quite a small piece of metal.
Yeah. So we wondered how many.
So how many keys do you make before? I like that question.
Before there's a duplicate.
A duplicate.
Obviously there's different kinds. There's Yales and then there's all the different locks. But
we'll just go with two identical keys, like two Yales. Yeah. What are the odds? If you got two randomly selected, two Yale keys, what are the odds that they would actually both open the same lock? I like that question. Yeah. Or maybe we're wrong. Maybe I'm being a bit cocky, and in fact, you can guarantee that there'll not be two. Do they go round again? So you go to the key cutters and you put that's variation number 756,204. But actually, there's only 1 million variations. So you get to 1,000,001, and it'll be exactly the same as I'm being silly. Laura, I like it. Danny, thank you. Drive carefully. 12:52 is the time. Rosemary's in Nottingham. Rosemary, question or answer?
Answer.
Carry on.
Hello, James. It's an answer to the question about why certain place names are translated differently. Yes. Okay, so Italian. Let's take Italian. In fact, it's not a language I speak, but I speak others. Italian. So the place names in Italian are going to end mostly in a vowel. Okay.
Yes.
So Roma, Torino,
yes.
Napoli. In English, we are from the Indo-Germanic, Indo-Germanic origins of our language. Yes. We're heavily consonant ending in so London, Bristol, Nottingham, where I live. Yep. So we don't have mostly names that translate into one ending with an A or an E or something like that in general. So in Russian, which I'm studying at the moment, heavily consonant language is full of them.
Yes.
And so if you said "Я живу в London," I live in London, it's the same as London in English because it's a heavily consonant.
Okay.
It depends on the rule of the language, but we mustn't forget that the name of the town is their original one. We must see it from their way out towards. I don't want to get all Brexit and England centric here. That is the original name. Now Napoli is the name of the town, but we translate it into English. So I hope I've tried to explain it, but it's a grammatical reason.
I think that makes sense, really, doesn't it? Qualifications?
I speak 5 languages.
Ooh, which 5? Let me guess. English?
Well, yeah.
There you go.
French,
1 out of
German,
1. 1 out of 5. No, don't spoil it. French and German, Spanish and Italian.
No, Russian. Russian.
Spanish and Russian.
Yeah. French, German, Spanish, Russian, yeah.
French, German, Spanish, Russian, English. And then if we were 6 years old, we could now say Australian and American.
I don't know that. I'm not very good at...
Canadian. We can speak all of these. Right, round of applause for Rosemary the linguist, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. That would normally be Mark in Barrow in Furness. I can see he's on the board and he'll probably have something to add, but will we get to him? I do not know. Ellie's in Kilburn. Ellie, question or answer?
Answer, James.
Thank you, Ellie.
Hi, it's about how you made maps before satellites.
Oh, yes. Marvellous.
So you need some basic equipment, a theodolite, which measures angles.
Yes.
A level, which measures the height between two fixed points.
Yes.
And some sort of distance measuring device.
Which could be a chain or a rope.
Could be a chain or a rope or, lots of walking about the countryside, as you said in your answer.
Yep.
And then between those three sets of information, you can use calculus and geometry to work out the distance and the height and the angle of any fixed point in the landscape to a line of two fixed points that you know the distance and it's a straight line.
So that's trigonometry. Point. That's triangulation.
Yeah, it's triangulation.
Did you hear how snotty Hassan was when I said it was triangulation?
Yeah, I think he had an idea about stars, trying to find on the ocean. It's a similar kind of thing.
Which is also triangulation, but of a different kind in a different context.
Exactly. But you need it has to be you have to do a three-dimensional thinking.
So I get that. So I can see the landscape emerging now, but how do I do the coastline?
Same deal.
Is it just the same thing? You just think of it in 2 dimensions rather than 3?
Yeah.
I love that. Qualifications?
I was a land survey assistant when I first left school for a summer and a bit.
Is that doing ONS maps or just?
No, it was a private company. They used to do maps of buildings and for setting out for a construction site, that kind of a thing.
I love it. And presumably it hasn't actually changed that much. You wouldn't use a satellite to do that, but you'd have lasers instead of... The measurements could be done with lasers and things like that.
When I was doing a theodolite, you had a theodolite that you read onto a piece of... And you wrote it down on a piece of paper.
It'd be digital now.
And now everything's digital, yeah.
Great stuff. Love it. Round of applause for Ellie. That was a great answer.
Oh, thank you, James.
Mike's in Morden. Mike, question or answer?
It's an answer.
Go on, Mike.
It's about the differs on the a standard
keys.
Yale lock before you get to another key. About 1,100 differs.
Shut up. Is that all?
That's all, yeah, on a standard Yale.
So if I had 1,100 keys, I could open any Yale lock?
Yes, eventually, if you got the time, yeah.
Yeah. Qualifications?
Locksmith for over 40 years.
Well, you've just given away a trade secret.
There you go.
So only 1,100
keys and you're in.
Only 1,100 variations on a Yale key. So here's an interesting one. Phil's in Sale. He says, when I was young, we had a flat near London, but our main house was near Manchester. Ooh, get Phil. By coincidence, the front door keys opened the doors at both properties.
Yeah, well, once in 40 years, I've changed we're talking about a standard Yale lock.
Yes.
Generic. Once only, I've changed the Yale lock, and the customer said, my old keys still work it. And that's only ever happened once.
In that case,
I'm changing them all the time, every single day. So
someone's what, had a burglary, or they've lost their key? No, it couldn't have lost their keys. They wanted to change. They wanted to change the lock because there'd been a burglary. You changed the lock. They put their old key in the lock, turned it, and it worked.
It worked again. Quite embarrassing, but you know.
It's just genius, mate. I bet you're not expecting this, but you're getting one of these.
I'm Ray Liotta, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. If you build it,
thank you very much.
They will come.
I just think that's fantastic. 1 in 1,100, and it actually happened to you, which is an 1,100 to 1 chance, I think, unless I've just done the odds wrong and spoiled everything. Nice work, Mike. Thank you. He got a Ray Liotta, so I am going to give the board game to the birthday girl. Was it Siobhan? It was Siobhan, wasn't it, whose birthday it was? Siobhan gets the board game because it's her birthday. Was it Iona or Siobhan? Well, just check. Whoever's birthday it was. I think it was Siobhan. It might have been... No, it was Siobhan. Anyway, whatever. The birthday girl gets the box. Stop quibbling, honestly. I'm surrounded by pedants. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back to it. The whole show podcast on Global Player where you can pause and rewind live radio. All LBC shows are there to catch up on, as well as the world's biggest podcasts. Pause and rewind live radio. In fact, 2 mentions of full disclosure this week. The Gabor Mate one is still there, and a special weird full disclosure where Emily Maitlis interviews me, which an earlier caller was so kind about. They're all on Global Player, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. You are always in control. Download it for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick with you at 4. But now on LBC, it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
Thanks very much, James.
James O'Brien on LBC.